Celia thinks about how everything changed the second that other girl showed up. Her life just started falling apart. She mentions losing her dreams, her home, and her love, basically saying she lost everything and now she's just trying to get through the day. She reaches for her instrument, telling herself she just has one more request to finish up. She finds herself at the knight's guardhouse and takes a look around since this is where she needs to be. Her name is Celia Lansbury, and it turns out she's actually a pretty big deal. She's one of the holy musicians from the Farrington Kingdom, a place that's got blessings from the spirits. As the leader of these musicians, she spends her time supporting the country and doing her daily rounds. One of the knights in the guardhouse is looking pretty rough, telling her the heat and tired vibes really got to him. He asks her to take care of him and Celia just says she's got it, getting her instrument ready. She realizes the guy needs some serious recovery and healing, so she picks out the perfect song for the job. Celia calls out to the spirits in the earth to lend her their power, plucking a string as she stands there with magical energy and sparkles swirling all around her instrument. She says it's time to get started and begins to skillfully play the strings with her fingers, announcing the start of her sacred performance while waves of music and light fill the room. With a gentle smile, she explains that this is exactly what her mission is all about, channeling spirit power into her music to heal both the bodies and minds of everyone around. She sits and plays for the group, mentioning how this work helps keep the whole nation at peace, closing her eyes in deep focus as she explains that this is the duty of a holy musician. Eventually, she stops and says that should be enough for them, but the knights look totally shocked, asking if it's really over already since they were enjoying it so much. The music stops and one of the knights speaks up, asking Celia if there's still more left to hear. But she just looks at him and says he seems to have recovered plenty, so she's decided more treatment is unnecessary. The knight gets annoyed and says playing to the end doesn't cost her anything and it's her job anyway, but she tells him he's wrong. She looks him right in the eyes and explains her actual job is to give holy performances that help people with their daily lives, noting that if she pushes the magic too far, it'll actually just weaken the natural strength people are born with, explaining how spirits don't really know how to hold back their power or understand the limits of a human body. She mentions that spirits chose humans with good compatibility to use their power skillfully, which is how holy performers started. Celia finishes up and tells him that if he just rests a little longer, he'll be able to go right back to his training. The guy loses his cool and asks if she's really abandoning a patient and charging money for such a half-assed job. But she doesn't budge, just reminding him that they need to keep their own funds going too. Celia keeps her cool and explains the money goes toward things like living costs and keeping their gear in good shape, adding that the price is actually pretty fair given everything it covers. But she also makes sure to mention she's not even the one who sets the rates in the first place. She finishes up by telling them to let her know if they need any more help later on, and as she walks through the huge hall, she lets out a heavy sigh. She can't help but think about how her work feels like a total thankless job sometimes. And then someone calls out her name from across the room. Celia stops and looks back to see who's trying to get her attention. One of the other girls gives her a big smile and tells her good work, asking if she's finally done with all her duties for the day. Celia confirms she just handed in the report for the clinic visit, and the other girl mentions they just got back from seeing the Queen Mother too, when a girl named Penelope comes sprinting down the long hallway. She's yelling for Celia at the top of her lungs, but Celia sees what's about to happen and tries to tell her to slow down. It's too late though. Penelope catches her foot and starts to go down hard. The girl hits the floor with a massive crash. Celia reaches out and shouts, asking if she's okay because that fall looked like it hurt. Penelope groans from the ground, clearly in some pain. Even though she's hurting, she looks up and says she's just glad she managed to protect the holy string she was carrying. Celia's face goes dark as she looks down, saying she already hit her limit for the month, and she loses her cool for a second, asking Penelope just how many times she plans on tripping while holding that holy string. She stands over the girl and tells her that while her own body is one thing, she needs to think about what happens if the string actually breaks. Penelope groans out an apology, but Celia snaps back that she already told her to hem her robe since she trips on the edge of it every single time, so the girl just looks down and apologizes again, admitting that she's actually just really bad at sewing. Penelope looks up with big watery eyes, and Celia starts to tell her that if she's really that bad at it, she should just find someone to help her out, all while gently reaching down to take the girl's hands. Celia's expression softens as she explains that while some accidents can't be helped, she needs to avoid the ones she can and stay out of danger. Penelope's face lights up with a massive smile as she yells back that she completely understands, and she tells Celia she loves her, while Celia just points her toward the infirmary to get checked out. Celia watches Penelope and the others head off, thinking that while they talk a big game, they still have a long way to go before they're actually ready, And as soon as she's out of earshot, the people nearby start whispering, asking each other if they saw that and how scary Celia really is. Celia hears them talking about how she acts all high and mighty just because she's the head now, even though she's only 17, so she just keeps walking while they keep complaining, saying she only bosses everyone around because the king personally favors her. One guy chimes in that she's definitely arrogant, but they have to deal with it since she's the Duke of Lansbury's niece, and someone else adds that the Duke probably doesn't even know what to do with her, making Celia realize they're talking loud enough for her to hear on purpose. She thinks about how cowardly they are for never saying any of this to her face, or when anyone else is actually around to hear it. Celia takes a shaky breath and tries to tell herself it's fine, even though she knows everyone basically just thinks of her as a crybaby. She grips her clothes and tries to stay composed, repeating to herself that she's strong and that she's doing just fine. And finally, she looks up with a bit more focus, deciding she doesn't need to listen to any of them because she knows she's doing the right thing. Celia sits alone at her desk late at night, finally letting it show how tired she really is after a long day of dealing with everyone, and she starts looking over the paperwork for the new recruit coming tomorrow, thinking it's pretty weird to see a former farmer signing up for this. But just as she's lost in thought, a voice from the hallway asks if she's still inside, catching her totally off guard. She scrambles to get up and yells out that she's coming to open the door right now, and it turns out to be the king himself, who tells her she's doing a great job for staying in the office so late. Celia gets all flustered and thanks him for stopping by when he's so busy, then immediately offers to get some tea ready for him. The king just smiles and says he's actually been looking forward to having some of her tea, so he takes a sip and mentions how it's always great despite the light color, even though he can't help but notice how incredibly bitter it is. Celia starts sweating from the feedback and quickly apologizes for the taste, but the king brushes it off and thanks her for all the work she does in town and for looking after the Empress Dowager before changing the subject. The king looks at Celia and mentions he's heard about the knights being pretty heartless toward her lately, which makes Celia quickly try to downplay it. She tells him not to worry because she's the only one being targeted, and as long as her team stays out of trouble, she really doesn't mind what people say about her. The king doesn't seem satisfied with that answer. He just looks at her and tells Celia to come closer, so she sits right next to him and answers formally, calling him Your Majesty like she always does. He leans in close enough to touch her face and reminds her that he told her not to use those formal titles when they're alone, leaving Celia totally flustered as they hold hands. It's actually been about 6 months since they first admitted how they felt about each other. The king asks her if she'll be willing to wait for him until things in the kingdom finally settle down, and he mentions her uncle, the Duke of Lansbury. He wants to become the kind of ruler that the Duke can actually respect. With a serious look on his face, he looks her right in the eyes and tells her he wants to make her his wife. Celia's eyes well up as she thinks back to 8 years ago, when Lord Elvis first started making moves that changed everything. He invaded the neighboring Grossheim kingdom and took down Prince Conrad to conquer the land. She thinks about how brave he was, moving up from being the third prince to becoming the crown prince himself. And with a massive blush on her face, Celia tells him she's going to work even harder to be a wife he can be proud of. Elvis smiles and reminds her that while their romance is still a secret, he's a bit worried about her. He leans in close, gently telling her not to overdo it or push herself too hard. Looking out at the castle grounds, Celia feels like she can handle any insults people throw at her as long as she stays focused. But then a new girl named Muriel Burnby shows up, nervously shouting her introduction to everyone. Celia introduces Muriel to the team, saying she'll be the one training her but expects everyone else to be supportive too. A weird investigation report follows, filled with some really strange and confusing notes about how things are going. Muriel's skills as a holy harmonist are actually top tier, and Celia starts thinking that if the girl has enough potential, she could even end up leading the group one day, which is a big deal because Celia only has about 4 years left before she has to step down from her role as a holy harmonist. It turns out it's never too early to start looking for someone to take over the top spot, mainly because this specific power only shows up in women and usually hits its peak when they're still in their late teens. Once they hit their 20s, the power fades away fast, forcing them to leave the front lines and making their careers as harmonists pretty short-lived. So Celia keeps things positive and tells Muriel they should work hard together, mentioning she's expecting some big things from her. Muriel is totally hyped and yells that she's looking forward to working with Celia while wearing a massive smile. Seeing that energy, Celia makes a silent promise to herself to train the girl properly and make sure she succeeds, but things take a turn immediately when Muriel has a total breakdown, screaming that she can't do math and that the work is impossible. Celia just stands there holding the paperwork, feeling like she's the one who's about to start crying after seeing how much of a struggle this training is going to be. Muriel's holy music is a bit messy, but it's way more effective than anyone expected from a beginner, and because of that everyone thinks she's got a bright future ahead of her. But for now, Celia is just trying to get her to focus on the basics. Muriel isn't having it though. Muriel yells about why she even has to learn math, so Celia explains that she needs it for writing reports and buying supplies, but the girl just snaps back that it would be way easier to just let someone else handle all that boring stuff. Celia tells her that while asking for help is totally fine, she isn't always going to have someone standing right there to do things for her. So she gives the kid a little tap on the head and says she needs the bare minimum to survive. Muriel just groans and keeps complaining about it. Watching this disaster, Celia starts thinking that even Penelope looks good right now because at least she tries her best, making Celia head out to the library to find an easy math book for beginners. But as she's walking through the halls, she overhears a couple of maids gossiping about her, saying the head holy musician was seen bullying the new girl again. The maids keep talking trash, saying the new girl ran out of the room crying and acting like Celia is some kind of villain for just doing her job. Celia thinks about how Muriel just had a total meltdown and left, but she's mostly worried about her uncle giving her another hard time, especially since she just got a lecture about the Night Order. She remembers her uncle never liked her mom marrying a commoner, and knows the only reason she wasn't kicked out after her parents died was her talent. Suddenly, a voice asks about the books. It's Dennis, and he startles her by asking if she's really planning on studying even more, but he stops when he sees the book. He's shocked that Celia is actually looking at beginner stuff. Celia tells him he scared her and explains the book is for the new kid who's struggling, yet Dennis mentions the rumors have already reached the Knights, and Celia knows that's not good news. But Dennis doesn't care about the gossip. He tells her he knows how hard she works, and reminds her with a smile that she was studying just like this back when they first met. Celia looks back at the old days and asks Dennis if he wasn't always hitting the books just as hard as her. She thinks about how they first met at the library back when they were just students. He's a year older and a really nice commoner who's stuck by her as one of the few friends she can actually trust. Dennis mentions that since he got promoted, he's in a better spot to have her back. So he tells her straight up to never hesitate to come to him if she's ever in a jam. Celia gives him a soft smile and thanks him. She admits that things were actually starting to feel like a bit too much, but she feels a lot better now. Knowing she has Dennis, her other friends, and the king himself in her corner makes her realize she isn't alone, giving her the confidence that things are finally going to be okay. Later on, Penelope is making a scene and calling Celia mean. She's worked up, demanding to know why Celia won't just finish the job and completely cure the person they're visiting. But the patient just sighs, saying they've lost count of how many times they've argued about this, and that being able to live a normal life is already enough. Celia listens as Penelope lays into her. It's the same lecture over and over, and Penelope is totally fed up. She mocks Celia for always warning people about spirit power and mental strength, accusing her of just walking away from patients who need help. The crowd starts turning on her too. Some guy in the back tells her to finish the job, while another gets right in her face, asking if she's just taking their money for nothing. Celia grips her instrument until her hands shake. She isn't stopping because she wants to, but no one is listening. She tried to warn the rookie Muriel so many times, but the girl just puts on a show. Penelope calls Celia mean for bullying her, and everyone starts wondering why a person like Celia is even in charge. The vibes get toxic fast. People start calling Celia a tyrant and saying Muriel's way actually makes sense, so support for the rookie just keeps growing. Muriel has become totally arrogant and won't listen to a word Celia says anymore, leaving Celia stuck in a bad spot. These holy performances are crazy powerful. Some are even locked away as forbidden books because using them too much actually wrecks people's spirits and makes them mentally weak. Celia looks completely crushed, thinking about how if this mess creates an opening, other countries might actually try to invade them. She grips her clothes tight, realizing it's going to be dangerous if everyone keeps taking Muriel's side like this. She looks at Muriel's smug face and the serious guards around the castle, knowing she has to make the girl change her ways. It's not just Muriel though, she has to change the mindset of everyone in the castle before things get worse. By the time the sun starts going down over the palace, Celia is just wiped out and can barely keep it together. But the king summons both of them to the throne room, asking if they even know why they're standing there. He looks right at Celia and asks why two holy musicians are out here causing such a huge scene. Celia kneels and tries to explain that she thinks highly of Muriel's talent and was training her to be the next leader. But Muriel suddenly cuts her off, asking the king if she can speak for herself since they clearly don't see eye to eye. She tells him that's enough and claims their power should be used for the people, but Celia isn't using it to its full potential. King Elvis looks pretty skeptical while he listens to Muriel's speech. He mentions he's heard that what she's describing is basically the same old philosophy leaders have been using for generations, but Muriel doesn't back down at all, smiling while she tells him that just because things have always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's actually right. Celia is completely stunned by how bold the girl is being, but before she can even say anything, the king snaps at her to be quiet. Muriel takes the floor again with this look of total confidence. She says that times are changing and describes a vision for a country where people don't have to suffer anymore, putting on a huge emotional performance. She looks the king right in the eyes and says she really believes this is a goal they should all be working toward. Celia is starting to sweat and feels like she's losing control of the situation. She's internally freaking out, wondering what happened to make this girl so different, and she can't even wrap her head around how this is the same bratty Muriel who used to just throw tantrums. Muriel keeps her act going, telling the king she wants him to see the truth himself. With a big smile, Muriel suggests they settle their differences by having a competition, and she wants the top leadership seat to be the prize, leaving Celia absolutely terrified. She's caught completely off guard as her whole career is suddenly put at risk in front of the king. Since things are getting so tense and everyone in the castle is starting to get restless, it's clear they need to settle this mess soon just to get things back to normal. So the big bosses finally made a call after talking it over, and Celia sits at her desk late at night, telling herself she can't lose this. Dennis hangs out nearby, mentioning how Muriel's words are actually starting to get to people in the castle, but he says that's exactly why she needs this win to keep things running smooth in the future. Celia gets a serious look, swearing on her pride and her loyalty to the king that she's going to win. Dennis tells her he appreciates her working so hard every night, which catches her totally off guard. She jumps a bit and notices he's holding her bag, asking him what he's doing with it. He explains he grabbed some leftovers from dinner and asks if she still likes cheese bread, telling her to make sure she eats when she gets back to her room and actually gets some sleep. Celia just looks at him with a soft smile and thanks him for looking out for her. Dennis mentions he just remembered he'll be helping out with the dual exams too, so Celia asks if he's working behind the scenes, and he says he's just doing basics like passing out papers. He stops for a second and calls out her name, catching her attention, telling her he knows how hard she's been pushing herself lately and that he truly believes she'll win. Celia smiles and thanks him, promising to do her best as she thinks back on all those long nights of intense practice and studying standing before the results board. She tells herself she has to win. But looking at the dual exam results, it says the animal Muriel played for is fine while Celia's died, and the crowd can't believe it. The report claims Celia was totally out of rhythm and misread the whole score. It gets even worse when the board shows Celia's written exam was a total failure with every answer wrong, leaving her shaking in shock as Muriel is announced the winner, and Celia can only say it's all a lie. The crowd doesn't hold back, everyone starts whispering for her to look at those results, talking about how she acted all high and mighty but ended up failing. People are even mocking her for calling herself the top student with scores like that. Celia's losing it, she tells herself it's a lie and that there has to be a mistake, because she knows for a fact she healed that animal perfectly. She thinks back to how she checked her written exam a million times and nailed the sight reading, so nothing makes sense. Her friends run up calling her name, they're totally furious and yell that this is ridiculous because there's no way she'd get such a bad score. They start saying they should protest the results, but someone tells them to watch their mouths. Celia realizes that making a scene about the king's ruling would just get her people in trouble. She decides to back down for now and talk to him later. Meanwhile, Muriel is all smiles, acting happy that she won after all. The room is buzzing, guys are crowding around Muriel, telling her they knew she'd pull it off and congratulating her on becoming the new head holy musician while she just smiles and plays it humble, telling the crowd she couldn't have done it without their support. Standing nearby, the high-ranking guys watch the scene. One of them mentions that having Muriel in charge is probably going to make the group's energy a lot better, especially since she's such a huge change from the girl who held the position before her. Celia's stuck watching the whole thing, she's spiraling because she saw Muriel making tons of mistakes during the test, yet somehow she's the one losing her job to her. Celia's caught in her head until Muriel spots her across the room and calls her out. Muriel walks over with this smug look. She brags about how she knew she'd win because her talent is just on another level compared to everyone else. She gets right in Celia's face, acting like she's waiting for something and asks if she has anything to say to the winner. Celia keeps her cool and just gives her a dry congrats, which catches Muriel off guard since she didn't use a formal title. Muriel's ego takes a hit. She glares at Celia and makes sure to remind her that she's the boss now. Celia forces out a shaky congratulations, but her hand is clamped into a tight fist at her side as she finally addresses her as Lady Muriel. Muriel just gives her this fake smile and says she's welcome, then immediately asks Celia what she's planning to do with her life now. She leans in with a look that's totally condescending, telling Celia that if she gives a real apology and says she's sorry for everything, then she might actually be nice enough to let Celia stick around as one of her low-level subordinates. Celia is fuming inside. She can't believe how much of an attitude this girl has, and it's getting to be too much for her. She decides right then that she'd much rather just quit being a holy musician entirely than ever spend a single second working under someone like Muriel. The whole room goes quiet and then everyone starts losing it. Muriel is standing there in total shock while Celia tries to get another word out. Muriel finally snaps and yells that if Celia is going to talk like that, then she should just hurry up and quit like she said. She keeps going, telling Celia to just burn her holy string and get lost, which catches everyone off guard until Dennis jumps in and yells that even if Muriel is the boss now, she doesn't have the right to make a call like that. King Elvis suddenly storms into the room. He's clearly had enough and yells to find out what all the noise is about. He stands in the center of the hall and tells everyone the match is over, so there's no reason to be fighting. Celia can only look up and whisper his title as he takes over. Muriel immediately bows and starts apologizing while the king asks her to explain exactly what went down, all while Celia watches with a look of pure dread. Muriel seizes the chance to lie, telling the king that Celia has been saying awful things and is refusing to work under her, even claiming that Celia wants to quit the holy musicians entirely. Celia tries to jump in and tell him not to listen to the lies, but the king shuts her down instantly, telling her to be quiet before she can even finish her sentence. He looks away with a cold expression, mentioning that he's already looked over the results of the evaluation himself. Muriel's face lights up as the king begins to announce her reward, telling her that since he keeps his promises, she is about to get exactly what she wants. He officially declares that he's making Muriel the new leader, and she looks like she's just won everything she ever dreamed of. But then his tone shifts. He mentions that having people who don't get along will only cause issues for the group later on, and since this is what Muriel wants, he gives a dark, smug smile and says that Celia is officially expelled, leaving Celia staring back in complete horror as her life falls apart. Celia tries to get a word in, but King Elvis cuts her off immediately, telling her he's going to do exactly what he said. Muriel leans in close to the king with a huge, fake smile, telling him she's really looking forward to working with him now. Elvis gives her a look that makes her blush, saying he's counting on her to do a good job, while Celia watches that smile, realizing it's not for her anymore. The people watching start gossiping about how the two of them make such a perfect couple, and it won't be long before they're married. Everyone is celebrating the idea of the king and Muriel together, which leaves Celia standing all by herself in the middle of the crowd. She finally gets it. She's been completely replaced and cast aside like she never mattered. Elvis won't even look her way as he stays focused on Muriel, but things only get worse when she heads back to the family estate. The Duke of Lansbury is losing his mind, screaming that she's dragged their glorious name through the mud because of her failure. He doesn't want to hear any excuses and yells at her to get out of his sight, effectively kicking her out of the only home she's ever known. Just like that, she's lost her status, her honor, and the man she loved. She's officially disowned. Celia stands there completely broken, finally realizing she's lost everything. The castle towers over the horizon as she begins her long walk away. She looks down at the single bag in her hand, the only thing she has left. It feels totally empty. The weight of the bag is barely there, and she can't help but feel like she's just as empty as the bag is. Her loyal staff tried to keep her from leaving, but she knows it's too risky for them to be seen with her, so she just hopes they can get along with Muriel for their own sake, when a voice suddenly calls out her name. Dennis comes running up, looking completely out of breath, but he's just glad he actually caught her in time. Celia sees him and immediately feels guilty, apologizing for not being able to live up to what he expected of her. Dennis isn't having it though, and tells her they should go back and protest this mess together. He starts getting loud, yelling about how ridiculous the whole thing is and how someone definitely rigged it, but she tells him to stop. Celia looks back at Dennis with a worried face, warning him that he'll get charged with a crime too if he keeps this up. But Dennis just shouts right back, saying there's no way he can just stand there and watch her leave like this. He's not backing down, and it makes her think back to when they were still in school. They were sitting in the library talking about the future, and she asked him what he wanted to do, leading to Dennis looking all serious for once. He told her there was definitely a dream he wanted to fulfill more than anything, making Celia lean in and ask what kind of dream it was. He got a bit shy about it though, just mumbling and acting a little awkward while he quickly flipped the question back on her. He asked what her dream was instead, and since she was always so focused, she didn't hesitate, telling him with a huge smile on her face. To her, the answer was totally obvious, and she made it clear that her only goal was to become a great holy musician. Back then, she told Dennis she wanted his dream to come true too, but standing there now, the reality of the situation finally hits her. She starts crying, telling Dennis that her dream is officially over, and there's nothing left for her when Dennis calls out her name to stop her. He sounds different now, telling her he has something he needs to give her. Dennis leads her away from the open area, telling her to come over to a more private spot, making Celia totally confused as she watches him move. She asks what he's even doing right now, but she completely loses it when she sees what he's holding. Dennis just smiles, saying he's relieved the swap actually worked out, as he explains that the instrument everyone thought was burned and buried was just a fake he made. The real one is safe and Celia can't believe it. She holds onto it tight, thinking about how they've been together since her first day as a musician, and tells Dennis thank you over and over. She's full-on crying now, just hugging her instrument against her chest, while Dennis gently wipes the tears off her face. He asks her if she actually has anywhere she can go now, so Celia takes a second to think before telling him she's considering a place called Greenhill, which Dennis thinks is a solid plan. He's heard the weather is great there, and since it's so far away, she can finally live a quiet life. He gives her one last piece of advice, telling her she's gotta hide that she's a holy musician because people talk too much. Celia agrees, promising she'll keep it a secret. Celia looks at Dennis with so much gratitude, thanking him for everything he's done to help her. But she feels bad because she doesn't have any money or anything else to give him in return for saving her. Dennis just reaches out, telling her that he doesn't need anything, all he wants is for her to find her own happiness. And he gives her a kind smile, promising that he'll be praying for her to stay safe on her journey. He tells her to take care of herself, and Celia can't help but get a bit choked up hearing that as she finally says goodbye and starts heading out, leaving her old life behind to start over somewhere new. Flash forward to a brighter day where someone is busy hanging up a massive pile of laundry in the sun, when a little kid runs over to his mom, yelling that Celia is calling for her from inside. The mom looks up and wonders what Celia needs this time, but she's got her hands full with work, so she asks her son if he can just go over there instead, and the kid is totally down to help out. Celia gets herself hyped up for the morning, shouting that she's ready to get going. She stops by to see an elderly woman who thanks her for coming and asks if she can handle the books today. Celia gives her a big smile, telling her she's got it covered and to leave the work to her. She figures she'll start by sorting through the papers. It's already been 2 full years since she started this new life. She lives in a massive, grand building that stands out against the sky. It's located in the Vest region, a place that used to be part of the Farrington Kingdom a long time ago. Eventually, the area broke away and became a neutral zone that doesn't answer to any specific country. Tucked away on the slopes of Greenhill is the place she calls home, known to everyone as Greenhill Manor. There are about 100 people living there together, and everyone has their own specific job to handle. Celia notices the manor's crafts are selling so well that they might finally be able to afford to fix the roof. The laundry mother looks pretty relieved, saying the roof leaks have been just awful lately, so she's glad they're getting fixed. Celia checks over the books and notes the guys working as mercenaries are bringing in good money, so they should buy the kids some new textbooks soon. The manor runs on everyone's hard work, from the people out earning money for the upkeep to the ones handling all the daily chores, and even the staff who stay behind to make sure the children are getting a proper education. Looking at everyone, Celia realizes how much the residents support one another, and she's come to see them all as her own friends and family. It's a huge change from how things started, especially since she basically fled the royal capital like she was being chased out. But Greenhill took her in when she had nowhere else to go, and now her old life as a holy musician feels like a total blur. She sits at her desk, finishing up the paperwork and thinking that if she can just keep living a quiet, peaceful life like this, she'll be more than happy, finding a new kind of peace as a so-called fallen prodigy. The night is quiet over the manor, but at that same time, things are starting to move for Muriel. Celia looks back on her choice to run away from the royal capital. She just wanted to get as far away from Lord Elvis as possible. The one person who gave her a chance when she had absolutely nowhere left to turn was the master of the manor. Everyone calls her mother. In a flashback to that day, Celia explains that she's been disowned and has no place to stay. She asks Mother if she can please live there. Celia admits she isn't much help with physical labor, but offers up her academic knowledge to help out, and Mother tells her that's totally fine. The older woman smiles, mentioning that even though she's blind, her intuition is still sharp enough to see the truth. Back in the present, Mother tells Celia she'll be okay, noticing how much she's grown lately. It catches Celia completely by surprise. Mother points out that Celia is like a totally different person than she was 2 years ago, and Celia quietly agrees that things have changed. Celia jokes that she finally stopped tearing the clothes apart while doing the laundry, but Mother just laughs and says that wasn't the point. Celia keeps the jokes going, asking if she means how she stopped cutting herself while peeling food or breaking weapons whenever she tried to fix them. Mother can't help but giggle at the old stories, telling Celia that she's definitely improved in those areas too. Celia looks back on how everyone at the manor used to just laugh it off whenever she made a mistake. That kindness meant she could try new things without feeling any pressure, and Mother remembers how it was when Celia first showed up. She mentions that the girl was always so tense, acting like she was constantly terrified of something, which makes Mother think that Celia must have been backed into a corner by something no one else could see. Celia listens quietly, realizing that back then she was totally convinced that if she wasn't useful, she'd just be thrown away. That memory of Lord Elvis still lingers, but she finally understands that her own fear of being useless was the real problem. Looking down at her work, she tells herself she's doing just fine now, and even though she used to be stuck in a lot of pain and despair, things are different. Now when she looks at Muriel, she just thinks the girl is pretty incredible, and she figures that she and Lord Elvis probably just didn't mean that much to each other in the end. It's a realization that brings her a lot of peace, and she thinks about how strong people can really be. It shows in the way she looks at the world now. Mother breaks the silence by mentioning that the rest of the group will be back from their work trips tonight. She's got a big smile on her face because everyone is apparently looking forward to Celia's performance just as much as the food. Celia gets all fired up, cheering and saying she's excited for it too. Celia pumps her fist with a huge smile. She's totally hyped up and tells everyone she's going to play her heart out for them, stepping firmly onto the wooden stage. She takes a second to thank the crowd for all their hard work today with their jobs and training, and while holding her harp close, she introduces herself as the nameless musician Celia before letting them know she's ready to start the show. The crowd goes wild immediately. Guys are shouting about the beauty of Greenhill arriving and telling her she looks as cute as ever, and seeing everyone raising their mugs really fuels her energy. She yells back that she's in top form today specifically because of their support. She takes her seat and gets her harp ready, giving herself a quick hype up. As she plucks the first string, she knows this isn't some fancy holy performance or a healing spell. It's just something simple, reminding her of a memory from her past. She looks out and tells the crowd they can pick out whatever song they're in the mood for. With a peaceful smile, she decides on a light waltz that everyone can sing along to, making the whole room feel connected, and the crowd is all for it. One guy says it's nice. A worker realizes he knows the words, and the local kid is just losing his mind with excitement. Celia throws her hand up and tells the whole crowd they should all sing together. The room just explodes as everyone raises their mugs, and one guy with a headband is laughing his head off while he drinks. Celia is just so happy they were actually looking forward to her playing. The ladies working the tables start singing along while they move. The kids are right there too, just smiling and singing their hearts out to the melody. The pub is full of people dancing and having a blast, making Celia realize she never felt this kind of vibe back in the royal capital. And as the music carries on, she looks out and wishes this song could reach Dennis and the rest of the holy musicians. She just wants the music to tell them that she's doing great on her own. Outside, the moon is huge and bright over the stone walls of the city. Later on, the girls are all hanging out together. One of them leans in and asks how things are going with Daniel lately, and then she turns the heat up by asking another friend what's happening with her crush, Jean. They're all sitting around some snacks and drinks, just loving the fact that they can finally get together and talk about romance like this. Celia is blushing and hugging her pillow, thinking about how she never realized sneaking out at night to talk like this could be so much fun. The girls ask if she has any romance stories of her own, and when she acts surprised, they tell her that plenty of guys in the lower town are definitely into her. One friend points out that Jonathan the Butcher is the best choice. He's a really hardworking guy who obviously has a huge crush on Celia. Celia just laughs it off, saying she only sees him when she's out buying food and that she's never really had much luck with guys anyway. But then she gets quiet and admits she was lying. Turns out, 2 years ago, the guy she actually wanted to marry ended up dumping her. Her friends think that's a total waste and tell her she needs to fall in love again, so Celia nervously promises to let them know if she finds someone good. One of the girls says she'll be waiting for that update, leaving Celia staring at the ceiling and wondering what a good guy would even be like. The sun starts coming up over the town. Celia's still thinking about those words and wondering if a guy like that will ever actually show up. Later on, while she's out in the city, someone suddenly calls out her name and asks if she's doing more shopping today. It's Jonathan, and when Celia thanks him for always delivering their food, he gets all red and says it's just his job, so it's no big deal. Penelope tells Jonathan that she actually wants him to rely on her more, thanking him for everything he does for the group. But Celia is just walking along with her groceries, smiling as she thinks about how much everyone in town has been talking about the butcher lately. As she passes through the busy market, a man nearby tells one of his workers to make sure they handle the delivery correctly. But then someone suddenly calls out her name from the crowd. A man stops in his tracks, looking completely stunned to see her standing there. He yells her name again, and Celia stops right in the middle of the street, turning her head to see who could possibly be calling for her. The guy starts shoving his way through the busy crowd, telling everyone to move aside and let him through as he rushes toward her. It turns out to be Dennis, who stands right in front of her with a massive grin, telling her he knew it was really her the moment he saw her. He looks her in the eyes and says it has been a long time since they were together. He seems genuinely happy to finally find her again. Celia gets all flustered and mentions it's been 2 years, so she just assumed he'd be married with a whole family of his own by now. Dennis absolutely loses it, repeating the word family in total shock while telling her to wait a second because that is definitely not the case. Dennis gives her a warm smile and says that just seeing her looking so well is more than enough for him, making Celia turn bright red. He starts to head off, waving while apologizing for interrupting the time she spends with her husband, but she isn't about to let him leave with that idea in his head. She reaches out and grabs his cloak, yelling for him to wait. Dennis freezes as she screams that the man isn't her husband and she definitely hasn't had any kids yet, leaving him looking pretty embarrassed. They find a bench to sit on, where Celia sighs about him having such a huge misunderstanding after 2 years. Dennis rubs his face and admits he's got no excuse for the mistake. He quickly changes the subject, asking her what brought her to Greenhill. He looks down at his gear and mentions his mission as a knight, but then reveals he actually quit the order due to some family issues. Celia is completely shocked to hear he left, but he just casually explains that he decided to drop by the town on his way back home. His expression softens as he looks at her, finally admitting the truth. He really just wanted to see how she was doing lately. They walk together and he tells her she's really grown up. Celia proudly says she's doing great and he just nods, glad to hear it. Celia gets an idea and offers to show Dennis around the Greenhill estate. She says it's been a while, so she'd love to take their time and catch up while they walk. Dennis tells her he's in no rush at all and would actually love to see how she's living these days, so he tells her to go ahead and lead the way. Celia starts bragging about how amazing she's become, especially now that she can finally make tea that isn't bitter anymore, which makes Dennis smile. He realizes she's been busy with stuff like cooking and laundry, but Celia just smiles back and adds that she feels like she's changing little by little every single day. She looks down at her hands, thinking about her new life and how she's honestly full of energy now. She tells him she thinks she's gotten a bit tougher since the last time they saw each other, but then her mood shifts and she gets a lot more serious. She looks right at him and tells him there's something she needs to know, asking him to tell her the truth about what happened to Farrington after she left. The memory of the castle hangs over her as she waits for an answer. She looks him in the eye and asks him again to just tell her what's been going on back home, because she really needs to know the details of what happened to the kingdom and everyone there after she was gone. Dennis looks pretty tense as he asks what the situation is with Celia, the weight of her past still hanging over them when Penelope suddenly pops up from behind their bench. She asks if they're finally done talking because she's ready to head home, which breaks the serious mood. Celia just laughs it off, blushing a little as she says this isn't exactly the right spot to be catching up on old times, so she stands up and tells Dennis she'll show him around for now. He looks up at her, following her lead as she brings him toward the massive estate, welcoming him to the place she now calls home. Inside, they meet with Mother, who is sitting in her usual rocking chair. She acknowledges that Dennis must be an old friend of Celia's and gives him a warm smile. She tells him that even though she can't actually see his face, she can feel exactly how much he cares about Celia. Dennis looks a bit taken aback by how easily she read him, but then Mother notices he's not in any rush and invites him to stay at the mansion for a while. Celia is completely shocked by the offer, but Mother just keeps going, explaining that they run an inn and he can stay for free if he helps out with the work since they're short-staffed with the mercenaries away. Dennis thinks the offer is too good to pass up. He asks if they can stay for about a month, which catches Celia completely off guard. She looks at him and asks if he's actually sure about doing this, so he explains it's a perfect way to save on travel money. Plus, he points out that working will keep him in shape while he smiles at her, saying they're finally reunited after all this time. He goes on to say they have tons of catching up to do. He wants to hear every single detail about the life she's been living. Celia closes her eyes, feeling the same way. She tells him she's been wanting to talk to him just as much, and Dennis lets her know he's really looking forward to spending the next month there with her. She blushes a bit, holding his hand and thanking him for staying. After they wrap things up with Mother, Celia shows him to his new quarters. She tells him he can use this room and says she'll introduce him to the rest of the house at dinner later. Dennis tells her thanks and that he's excited for it. As she heads out, Celia can't help but smile, thinking about how everyone here is just so nice. Dennis thinks about how he could tell just by talking to Mother that she's the one who really runs the mansion. As he's walking, he turns to Celia and mentions how it's obvious she's actually enjoying her time here. Celia takes a second to think about it, her eyes softening as she quietly agrees with him. She looks toward the window and starts to say something she's been holding back, but Dennis cuts in to apologize. He's worried that his arrival might have brought back a bunch of bad memories for her. Celia looks him right in the eye and tells him that's not it at all. She admits she definitely caused some trouble when she first got there and used to stay up at night thinking about the past, adding that if she's being honest, that whole time in her life was pretty painful to deal with. But then she gives him a bright smile and says things are different now because there are people who actually need her. And she explains it's not because she's some noble or a holy musician, but because they just want her as Celia, the girl who plays music. Celia gives him a warm smile, reassuring Dennis that things will be fine. She thanks him and admits she was feeling a bit trapped before, but she's doing better now. Dennis looks at her and says he can tell she's finally enjoying the present and looking forward. Then he asks if she wants to hear about what's been happening back in the Farrington Kingdom since she left. He starts talking about the musicians who worked under her, the people she's probably the most curious about, and mentions that from what he saw before he quit, they all seem to be doing okay. Dennis gets a serious look on his face and asks if he can tell her something specifically about Muriel Burnby. Celia smiles, saying it's been a long time since she heard that name and asks if anything changed over the last 2 years. So Dennis explains that ever since Muriel became the head, she never turned anyone away and had lines out the door every day. He says people would go to her for anything, from minor cuts and stiff shoulders to just being sad about a breakup. Dennis tells Celia that swarms of people were constantly surrounding Muriel. She's completely shocked, and he adds that the other musicians had to pick up all the slack, which meant no one was doing house calls, causing the number of sick people in town to skyrocket. While the king's visits to the Empress Dowager just stopped, leading to the sad news that the Empress Dowager actually passed away quietly last winter. Celia loses it when she hears this, but Dennis explains that the Empress actually fought with the king, defending Celia and her banishment, until the king just gave up on her entirely. Celia looks like she's about to break down, wondering how this could happen when their job is to protect people. But Dennis notes that Muriel hasn't changed, remembering how she used to play the victim and call Celia cruel. Moving on, he mentions that the situation gets even worse because even Lord Elvis has fallen under her spell, leaving Muriel in total control of the royal castle. Dennis looks pretty fed up as he mentions that the Knights have even started a Muriel fan club, which leaves Celia completely lost, asking what that even means. Dennis adds that the guys even tried to recruit him, and the second he turned them down, they demoted him. He says he didn't care since he was planning to quit anyway, but Celia is still totally shocked by the whole situation. Dennis just shrugs it off, saying he's fine with how things went down, because at the end of the day, he could never bring himself to like someone like Muriel Burnby, simply because he can't stand the way she thinks or the way she treats other people. He tells Celia he'd rather lose his spot in the royal guard than kiss up to people just to get ahead. Celia looks at him, feeling like he's a mirror of her past self. She remembers telling the king she'd rather do anything than work for him, even if it meant quitting her life's work as a holy musician. It hits her that they both felt it was better to lose what they took pride in than to lose themselves. Dennis claps his hands though, saying they should probably stop with all the sad talk. Dennis shifts the focus, asking if it's okay for him to hear her story now, which makes Celia pause for a second before realizing he's right. He mentions how interested he is since she's the mansion's musician, so Celia laughs it off, explaining that she can't use her holy strings anymore and just plays a normal harp. Even so, it's a huge hit with everyone at the house. Dennis tells her he'd love to hear her play again since it's been forever, and she gets super hyped, telling him to wait right there while she runs off to her room to grab her instrument, leaving him alone in the room. He softly says her name to himself, just leaning against the window. He thinks about how as long as she's happy, he's totally fine with wherever they're at. Dennis decides to do things right this time. He tells her that even though they met last night, he wants to do a proper introduction. He tells her his name is Dennis Carteret and he just turned 20, so she should feel free to leave all the heavy lifting to him. He says he'll be in her care for the next month, and Celia just stands there blushing. Celia is caught peeking around the corner like a total stalker, and Amy doesn't hold back, calling her a total creep for staring. Celia tries to play it off, saying she's just worried about Dennis because he looks way too skinny to be doing all that heavy lifting. Amy doesn't buy it for a second, pointing out that the guy is actually ripped and only looks thin if you compare him to a mercenary. Amy decides enough is enough and tells Celia if she's got time to stare, she's got time to help with the laundry, dragging her away while Celia begs for just one more minute. As she's pulled away, Celia sends a little mental cheer to Dennis, hoping he does his best with his new job. Back at the wash tubs, the laundry mother is trying to keep things under control, telling the kids to quit splashing the suds because cleaning the floor later will be a nightmare. One of the kids turns it right back on Amy, pointing out that she's actually the one making a huge mess and splashing water all over the place. Even as the boy keeps teasing her about the mess, Amy just brushes it off, saying it's fine since she's the one who's going to clean it up anyway. Celia decides to jump in and help, getting way too hyped as she yells out "Bubble Blast" while launching a wave of soap. She sends water and bubbles flying everywhere, leaving Amy standing there completely soaked and totally over the whole situation. Amy just stands there and gives her the biggest "I told you so" ever, basically rubbing it in. She asks Celia if she's actually doing okay after that mess, then says it's fine since they can just wash the soap off with a bit of water. Celia just laughs it off while covered in suds, saying it's not a big deal since there aren't any adults around to see her like this. But Dennis chooses that exact moment to walk by with a load of wood, calling out to Celia and telling her she's got soap all over her face. Celia dies a little inside and asks why he had to show up now, but Dennis just smiles and says he couldn't help himself once he saw her. He explains he's headed over to fix up the warehouse. It's his first time trying out carpentry, and he's actually looking forward to it. Celia gives him a big smile and tells him to have a good one, wishing him luck with the work. And then Dennis stops and tells her the same, reaching out and touching her face while she just freezes up. He looks her right in the eyes and says she's cute, even with bubbles stuck to the end of her nose, which leaves Celia's brain completely melting as she stutters the word back, while Dennis just casually asks if she wants him to get the soap off her cheeks too. Celia gets super flustered and yells at Dennis to stop teasing her, but he just keeps laughing while water splashes everywhere. And then she stands there feeling frustrated while a voice in the background teases her for going all out. Meanwhile, Dennis just whistles and walks off to start his chores. Celia's head starts spinning because Dennis actually called her cute. She just freezes up with a bright red face, barely able to even say anything back. She ends up hiding her face in her hands, complaining to herself about how he's making her heart skip a beat, which leads to the local kid laughing at her. He says she keeps making cow noises because she's been saying geez all day long. Amy joins in on the fun, telling the kid he's got it wrong. She says he's supposed to mention how Celia and Dennis look like a married couple. The whole place starts teasing her with married couple and cow jokes, so Celia snaps and tells everyone to quit being distracted and get back to work. The moon comes out after a long first day. Everyone is heading in for the night. Celia calls Dennis up to the roof to talk in private, apologizing for the weird spot but saying it's better than being alone in a room together. She asks him if it was tough working with those huge mercenaries all day, confessing she was so worried about him that her friends got annoyed. Dennis mentions that the local kids told him he was a really comfortable ride. Celia just stares at him, totally confused about what he's even talking about. He adds that he trains every day and might get buff eventually, which makes Celia freak out a bit. She admits she's not really into that idea. Celia starts smiling and says everything feels kind of strange right now. So Dennis looks over and asks her what she means by that, leading to her explaining how she never could have imagined just sitting on the ground and chatting like this 2 years ago. Dennis agrees it's a big change, while Celia thinks back to her old life as a duke's daughter and the head holy musician, remembering all the fancy chairs and soft mats she used to take for granted. She reaches her hand up toward the moon, reflecting on how she used to have status, a high position, and basically everything she wanted. But she reminds herself that she never planned on losing to Muriel. She put in all that effort and took real pride in her work, so she has nothing to be ashamed of. She used to tell herself she'd be totally fine even if her powers got weaker, or she had to step down as the head of the musicians thinking she could handle anything. And back then, she just dismissed anyone who criticized her as a coward. But looking back now, Celia feels bad and admits she didn't even try to listen to the advice Dennis was trying so hard to give her at the time. Celia looks down at the ground, sounding really down on herself. She tells Dennis that back then, she was just a conceited and arrogant woman. Dennis stays quiet for a second, just looking at her with a serious face before softly saying her name, but he tries to stop her, saying she wasn't conceited at all. Celia doesn't let him finish though, explaining it wasn't just about her high status or position. She looks away, admitting she totally overestimated her place in the world without even realizing it. Then she tells him there's one more thing. She stands over him to make sure he's listening, calling out his name before starting to explain what really happened with the king. The mood gets heavy as she finally comes clean, telling him about the specific words the king once said to her. With a sad little smile on her face, she drops the bombshell. The king actually told her he wanted her to be his queen. Dennis just sits there, completely floored by the news, barely able to get the words out. He asks her if the king really said that directly to her. Celia looks at the lantern on the ground, admitting that deep down in her heart, she really was arrogant enough to believe that becoming the queen was actually going to happen for her someday. Dennis looks at Celia with this really soft, serious expression and says her name, starting to tell her that. Celia cuts in, explaining how losing to Muriel was actually a good thing because it let her finally look at herself, and she's realized she gained a ton from it. She thinks about all the hard work she's done and how she's learned the actual value of a single piece of bread, which leads into how much she loves the simple stuff now, like just hanging out and having dumb conversations with her new friends. She looks up at the massive moon and mentions how lucky she was to find the Greenhill estate, telling Dennis that there's a whole world out here beyond the capital that the nobles don't even know exists, and she realizes that losing her status and her pride was actually worth it. Also, she could find something way more important. With tears in her eyes and a huge smile, she tells him that for the first time she truly believes she's happy. Dennis gives her this really kind look and says that maybe the whole reason she ended up at Greenhill was so she could finally leave the past behind and start a completely new life. Celia gets all flustered, stuttering that her story really isn't that big of a deal, but Dennis just smiles and tells her he's just happy he decided to come see her. She explains that it wasn't like she actually hated her life back in the royal capital, and she honestly misses the other holy musicians and still spends time worrying about how they're doing. She adds that there were also people like Dennis around back then, guys who didn't care at all about her high status or position, and she tells him that meeting him in the capital taught her a big lesson. People can actually connect with each other no matter where they stand in society. Dennis thinks back to the very first time they ever met, a younger version of himself walking up to her in a library and asking if he could sit next to her. Back then, she just looked away and told him not to even speak to her because he was a commoner, and looking back on it now, she admits she was basically the definition of arrogant. Dennis lets out a little laugh and says it's good to know his existence wasn't totally pointless back then. Celia immediately snaps back, shouting that of course it wasn't pointless at all. Dennis gets a bit more serious, telling her that it's actually the same for him. Meeting her ended up changing a whole lot of things in his life, and Celia asks if it was really the same for him. Dennis looks off to the side, admitting he can't really put into words exactly what changed, but he knows it did. Dennis keeps acting mysterious about how much he's changed, so Celia just laughs and calls him out for being so secretive again. He just smirks and puts a finger to his lips, telling her that a guy with a few secrets is actually pretty cool and asks if she finds that charming. Celia blushes a bit and plays along, calling him her charming Dennis, and saying she's looking forward. Dennis cuts her off to say he's the one looking forward to working with her. But then he adds that he's especially glad she doesn't rip the clothes while doing laundry anymore, which absolutely catches her off guard and she loses it, shouting at the top of her lungs to find out how he could possibly know about her embarrassing laundry accidents. Just then, Jonathan the butcher shows up at the manor with a big smile, waving as he announces he's there to drop off the latest food delivery. Celia thanks him like she always does, and Jonathan immediately offers to carry the heavy crates inside the house for her. She starts to tell him that things are a little different today, but Dennis suddenly leans in and asks if he should just take the delivery straight to the kitchen. Celia tells him the crate is actually really heavy but asks him to go ahead and handle it, so Dennis picks it up like it's nothing and tells them both to leave it to him, heading inside while Jonathan just stands there watching him go. Dennis flashes a big smile while hauling the delivery crate inside, telling Jonathan thanks for always carrying the heavy stuff for him and that it's a massive help. Jonathan mumbles a quick thanks back, but he's totally on edge because he can tell Dennis's eyes aren't actually smiling at all. Watching the two of them from the side, Amy starts getting curious about the vibe between Celia and this new guy, wondering what their deal is. Celia just thinks about it for a second and says Dennis is like someone she's known since they were kids. Jonathan gets a little flustered and asks if that means he's like a childhood friend, eventually just nodding and saying it's something like that. Celia gets a far-off look and mentions that thanks to him, she was actually able to change a whole lot. Jonathan just says he sees, but he's clearly struggling to process it and trails off while scratching his face. He tells her it really sounds like the guy is someone special to her, which catches Celia completely off guard. She repeats the word to herself, wondering what the idea of someone being special really even means to her. Her mind drifts back to the past when she was at the palace, realizing that things are nothing like they used to be back then. Celia holds her hands to her chest, feeling a certain warmth whenever she's around Dennis and wondering if it's just because she looks at him like an older brother. She smiles while telling Jonathan that's probably the reason, which makes Jonathan's heart race as he realizes that if it's just family vibes, he might actually still have a shot. Dennis pops back into the conversation with a huge grin, asking which crate he should move next. Celia is shocked he's already done, but Jonathan is just exhausted, telling the guy he's moving way too fast, so Celia tells him to grab the heavy ones next. Dennis agrees and tells her to go take a break in the shade. Celia tries to help out by reaching for one of the smaller bags, saying she can handle at least this much. Dennis immediately tries to stop her, warning her that she'll get hurt because the meat is a lot heavier than it looks. Celia just laughs it off and says she's fine, reminding him that the women at the manor do plenty of heavy lifting. But as soon as she picks it up, she starts shaking, realizing the meat is way heavier than she expected. Celia admits he has a point about the weight, but she still wants to help out. Dennis isn't having it though, telling her he just doesn't want her straining herself with the heavy stuff. He leans in really close, looking right at her and saying she's special to him, so he tells her to just relax and leave the hard work to him. Hearing that makes Celia's heart absolutely race. She starts wondering if this crazy feeling is just another part of that brother-sister vibe she thought they had. She can't stop questioning if it's normal to feel this way. While Jonathan walks off looking completely defeated, he tells them he'll just stick to delivering meat since there's clearly no room for him to get between them. Later on, Celia is back at the manor hanging up the laundry and smiling to herself. She can't help but think back to all the time she's been spending with Dennis. She remembers the quiet moments they've shared over drinks at the table, and those long afternoons just sitting in the grass talking about nothing. Her mind drifts to how he always makes her laugh. But she's still stuck on one thing: she's not sure if family love is actually supposed to be this intense. Even during a nice night under the stars sharing a toast, the thought keeps bugging her. She really wonders if it's normal for her heart to pound this much. It's a beautiful, bright day in the middle of town, and flags are hanging all over the place. Celia and Dennis are out finishing up their errands, and as he double-checks the list, Celia tells him they've only got the cheese left to buy. The shopkeeper welcomes them with a huge grin. He immediately asks Celia if she's finally out on a date with her boyfriend. Celia completely loses it and yells that it's not a date. She starts blushing and panicking, trying to explain they're just shopping and that he's like a brother to her. Dennis just leans in with a smirk and plays along. He tells the guy it's totally a date and asks for a discount, leaving Celia speechless. She snaps at him for the joke, but the shopkeeper just laughs. He mentions that a traveling bard is performing in the square today. He suggests they head over and check it out. The sound of the crowd is already filling the air from down the street. When they get there, Dennis is surprised by how many people showed up. Celia nods, knowing exactly why everyone is gathered there. She explains that while it's fun to watch, these performances are also one of their only ways to get real news. Since Greenhill is so far out, they have to rely on word of mouth, mostly stuff from mercenaries or random travelers passing through. The stories bards sing are actually a big deal. It's how people here find out what's going on in other countries. Dennis asks if she's mostly just excited for the music. She gives him a sweet look and says as a local musician, she definitely can't miss this one. The bard kicks things off by thanking the crowd for coming out to the square. He's got everyone's attention now as he announces the song he's about to perform, which is actually a story based on stuff he personally saw and heard in another country. He starts singing about a kingdom from a long time ago where a young, brave king ruled. This guy was apparently so amazing that every girl in the whole country wanted to be his queen. Out of all of them, the number one choice for the job was a certain noble princess. But even though she was beautiful, she was also mean and arrogant, so much that nobody liked her. The problem was her high status, so the king and his people had to just deal with her. Until one day, a regular commoner girl showed up at the castle and changed the whole vibe. She was just as pretty as the princess, but actually kind and wise, so the king fell in love instantly. The bard keeps the story going, saying the princess was bitter about the king and the commoner girl. She honestly thought she was way more beautiful and charming than anyone else, so she decided to come up with a nasty plan to frame the girl and get her out of the way. The deal was that the princess and the girl would compete in front of the whole kingdom, with the winner getting to marry the king. And as Celia listens, the bard explains that the king and everyone at the castle hated the princess so much they went along with it, fully expecting the other girl to win. When the day of the contest finally rolled around, the princess showed up acting like she had it in the bag, but it wasn't even close. Dancing, schoolwork, poetry, the princess couldn't beat the girl at a single thing, leaving the crowd and even guys like Dennis pretty stunned. It wasn't luck either. The princess didn't put in any work because she was so arrogant, while the commoner girl spent every second studying her heart out, leading to the princess being chased right out of the castle in tears. With her gone, the smart and hardworking girl finally got her happy ending with the king. They got married and had the support of the entire kingdom, and the bard wraps up the song, singing about how the king and queen lived happily ever after now that the nuisance was finally out of the picture. The bard's song finishes up with the couple living happily ever after, but Celia is left completely speechless and shaken by what she just heard, and she can't even process what's happening as an apple slips from her hand and shatters on the floor. A little while later, someone pours her a drink and asks if she's finally started to calm down a bit. Celia sits by the window looking totally drained, holding the cup and quietly thanking them for the help. She looks over at Dennis and remembers him talking to the bard earlier, so she asks him if that song was actually about her, and Dennis gets a serious look on his face, telling her that her guess is exactly right. He explains that the bard spent some time in Farrington before heading this way, picking up all the local gossip about the king's romance to use for his lyrics. Dennis remembers the bard mentioning how he put the song together. The only real change he made was swapping out the exiled musician for a princess to make it fit the fairy tale vibe. The bard was pretty proud of it too, saying that since the story was based on rumors everyone already knew, it became an instant hit with the crowds. Celia looks down, feeling the weight of it all as she realizes that, in the eyes of the public, she's basically been turned into the ultimate villain. Dennis pours her a drink and says there is a lot more to this story. Apparently, the bard was ordered to show up before castle officials once they heard his song, but instead of being punished for making a joke out of the king actually gave him a seal of approval and told him to spread the song everywhere, which leaves Celia totally shocked. She sits on the bed and tries to wrap her head around it, wondering why Lord Elvis would go out of his way to spread such a huge lie about her, and points out that even though her uncle disowned her, there is no way a man like him would stay quiet about something that ruins their family name. Dennis looks down and breaks some even worse news. He tells her that right before he left the capital, the Lansbury dukedom completely fell into ruin. Celia can barely breathe as he explains that another daughter of the Lansbury family joined the musicians, but she didn't get along with Muriel at all. Because the king favors Muriel so much, he labeled the entire family as traitors, including Celia's old incident, and stripped them of every right they had, making Celia realize just how much power the king and Muriel have over the kingdom right now. Dennis says that's exactly why he wasn't surprised by the bard's story, because if they keep using their power to crush people like that, the whole country is going to collapse. Celia still can't understand why the king would change so much, so Dennis just looks at her and asks if, after everything that's happened, she is still worried about the man who ruined her life. Dennis looks totally confused and mentions that since they promised their futures to each other once, he guesses his reaction is only natural. Celia looks at him and realizes she never actually explained the truth back then, so she decides to open up about her and Lord Elvis. She tells him the king wanted her to be his queen, and honestly, she thinks she just got caught up in the heat of the moment. She remembers how it all started back when she would visit his room to check on documents. He started whispering sweet things to her until they became secret lovers, and she was just obsessed with the idea of being wanted by a strong, good-looking king. But she learned the hard way that as soon as she lost that musician match, he dumped her without thinking twice. Looking back, she says it actually makes sense why he did it. Since she was kicked out of her house, lost her status, and had a terrible reputation, there was just no reason for a guy like him to be with her anymore. Dennis watches her closely and asks if she still has feelings for the king, which makes Celia jump out of her seat. She tells him not at all, because it's pretty much impossible to love someone after they toss you aside like trash. Celia's face starts turning red as she holds her drink, and she admits that actually right now she is just completely losing it. She slams her cup and yells about how incredibly mad she is, which totally catches Dennis off guard. He asks what's up, and she vents about how those people could have just left her alone, but instead they went out of their way to spread nasty lies about her. But then she takes a breath and says that no matter how much Lord Elvis and Muriel try to bring her down, she is just going to laugh it off. She realizes she is actually living a great life now, staying in a beautiful green place and being around people she actually likes. So she gives a smug little smile and asks if it wouldn't be the ultimate payback for them to see the person they trashed living her best life. Dennis laughs along and agrees with her, while Celia adds that if they think she's somewhere crying and miserable, then they are dead wrong. She gets so hyped up that she ends up splashing her drink all over herself and Dennis immediately freaks out, telling her she needs to take those wet clothes off before she catches a cold. Celia tries to brush it off, but Dennis starts explaining that he got a pretty bad scar from an injury back during his apprenticeship. Celia just stares at him, looking completely shocked by what he's saying. Dennis starts teasing her, saying it might be a bit too much for a girl, then he asks if she really wants to strip him that badly. He looks away all embarrassed and calls Celia a pervert, which makes her vein pop with pure annoyance. She completely loses it and screams that she is not a pervert, getting into a messy little scuffle with him. Later on, under a clear sky, the mood shifts as someone says they're just glad she's feeling better. It turns out Amy was watching her, and she mentions how Celia seemed pretty out of it when she got back yesterday. Amy gives a little smile and says she figures it's probably thanks to Dennis that she's cheered up. They share a laugh and Celia tells her thanks for looking out for her, but the vibe gets heavy when Celia looks down, looking pretty bummed out as she remembers that Dennis is going to be leaving soon. She just stands there gripping her dress and quietly agrees, trying to keep her feelings in check until Dennis shows up right on cue, waving and calling her name while Amy jokes about speaking of the devil. Celia notices Dennis looking a bit off and asks him what's wrong, especially since he suddenly asks her if she's free tonight. She tells him that's fine but asks what's up, so Dennis looks her right in the eyes and says he has a favor to ask. Celia just stares back while he grabs his gear and apologizes for being selfish. He just really wanted to hear her music one last time before leaving. They head out and sit on a mat together. Celia tells him it's no big deal since she's been wanting to play for a while anyway, and she figures they're far enough from the mansion for it to be safe. As she gets ready, Dennis mentions how the mercenaries threatened him on the way out, saying they'd wreck him if he ever laid a hand on her. Celia just gives him a sweet smile and says she's not worried because she trusts him completely. But Dennis gets this little smirk and reminds her that he's still a guy, and trusting him too much might lead to something happening. Celia gets totally flustered and yells that he'd never do anything like that, while he just keeps teasing her about being too trusting. Celia gives Dennis a hard time for always teasing her, but then she takes a breath and says they should just get started. She begins playing her harp with a soft smile, the music filling the night air as she finds her rhythm and focuses on the strings, thinking about how it's actually been a really long time since she's played like this. Part of her wants to go with a sacred piece, but she decides a normal one fits better, something slow and gentle for the night. As the melody continues, Dennis just watches her in silence, eventually whispering her name as he listens to the song. Celia looks up and meets his eyes as he tells her how glad he is that he got to hear her play one last time. The reality hits her that she won't be seeing Dennis anymore after this, even though she's always had so much fun being with him. She looks out at the trees under the moonlight, knowing that the time they spent together like this is officially over. Later on, Celia tells Dennis good night and says she'll see him tomorrow, and Dennis tells her good night too. Dennis stands there watching her walk away, quietly wishing her sweet dreams before they both turn in for the night. Celia gives a soft smile as she says goodbye, wishing Dennis sweet dreams as they head off for the night. As she walks away, Dennis stays behind, watching her and thinking she looks like a goddess standing there in the dark. It's a bittersweet moment for him because he knows how beautiful she is, but she's also way out of his reach. Later on, Amy catches up with Celia and asks if she's really not planning on going away with Dennis. Celia is totally caught off guard, but Amy doubles down, telling her it's obvious she wants to stay with him. Blushing and flustered, Celia says she's staying put, even though she'd love to see him again someday. She looks down, feeling like she won't get lucky enough for their paths to cross like that a second time. The reality of the situation finally starts to sink in realizing that this might actually be the last time she ever sees him. Amy sighs and tells her she should at least be honest with him, leaving Celia looking pretty confused. Moving on, Amy just comes right out with it and asks Celia if she likes Dennis, specifically if she likes him as a guy. Amy looks completely blown away and asks if she's for real, while Celia just sweats and wonders why she's even being asked that. Celia starts to say she's Dennis's something but just stammers and grips her clothes, looking pretty depressed as she admits that even she doesn't really know what's going on. Amy tells her that even if she forgets about the whole love and romance thing for a bit, she still needs to be honest. She explains it's better than just regretting it later and wishing she'd spoken up. So Celia looks down and admits she's right. Even though she feels so much gratitude toward everyone, she realizes that she's never actually come out and said it to them in a formal way. She decides she wants to say it properly, telling them thank you and that they're the reason she can finally move forward. Celia gets this fired up look and says she's gonna do it, which totally scares Amy. Amy starts cheering at the top of her lungs and Celia has to tell her to pipe down. Celia had all these big ideas about saying thank you and moving on, but things aren't going as planned since Dennis is stuck in a loud farewell party with the guys, leaving her with zero time to talk to him alone. She decides to head to his room in the middle of the night, even though it feels a little wrong, because he's leaving first thing tomorrow and it's her last chance. Celia wanders outside toward where she thinks his room is and hears some splashing nearby, then she stops when she hears voices. It's definitely Dennis, but he's already back from the tavern and he's hanging out with the other mercenaries. One of the men says their preparations are all set, so Dennis tells them the plan is to head for the royal capital tomorrow morning and raid every military base along the way. Celia hides behind a wooden post, completely frozen, as Dennis vows to take King Elvis's head and finally get revenge for the late king and queen. Celia's heart sinks as she hears the plan to take Lord Elvis's head. Her foot slips on the grass and a mercenary spots her instantly, yelling for Lord Dietrich to watch out as a hand reaches for her. She lets out a quick yelp before being tackled to the ground. Where they gag her, she can only groan while the rough handling makes her cry out in pain, until Dietrich tells the men to stop because she's a woman. One of the guys explains she was caught eavesdropping on their secret meeting. Celia just lies there, terrified and shaking on the dirt. Dietrich gives the order to take her to their hideout, telling them not to be too rough, and Celia looks up at the long shadow standing over her, her mind racing as she tries to understand why any of this is happening. Dietrich looks down at her with a cold stare, wondering out loud how things ended up like this. They drag her to some old ruins on the edge of town. One of the men tells her she's totally alone and it's useless to wait for help. Celia is still in shock, wondering why Dennis is mixed up in this mess, and asks who the other woman is. Dietrich looks down at her and notes she's from the Greenhill estate. It's obvious she overheard their whole talk, and one of the mercenaries asks what they're supposed to do now. Another guy casually suggests they just kill her, making one of the men speak up and say she's just a regular person, but Dietrich shuts him down. He tells them this woman used to be part of the royal castle and goes on to explain she's the Duke of Lansbury's niece and Elvis's rumored ex-girlfriend who left 2 years ago. He reveals she was actually the head holy musician, and the guys are completely shocked to hear she was a holy musician. Celia's eyes fill with tears as she tries to make sense of what Dietrich is saying. She's stuck on what he meant by before, and realizes that the name Dietrich is definitely from the Grossheim kingdom. She looks at the group and wonders if Dennis and the others are from there too. Her mind goes back 10 years to when Grossheim was invaded by the Farrington kingdom and turned into a total battlefield. Back then, Elvis was only the third prince and nowhere near the throne. He ended up killing the king, the queen, and the rest of the royal family just to take power for himself. The war finally ended when Elvis spared only the youngest prince, forcing the rest of the army to give up so he could take the win. And looking at everyone in the room, Celia starts to realize that all these people are actually survivors from that fallen kingdom. She watches the men and thinks about how they called Dennis Lord Dietrich, which makes it pretty clear he was someone high-ranking back then. The danger of the situation hits her hard. She knows if she doesn't do something, she's going to end up dead. Celia tries to say his name, but Dietrich just looks down at her and says her thin arms aren't strong enough to break those ropes anyway. He kneels down and tells her she's really a handful, saying he wouldn't have had to tie her up if she had just stayed quiet. Things get even darker when he warns her that even though they've been friends for a long time, if she tries to stop them, he leans in right toward her face and says he will kill her without hesitating, leaving Celia silent as he finally drops the act, revealing his real name is Dietrich, and these men are actually the Knights of Grossheim. He looks totally different now, just sitting there and explaining that every single one of these guys is a subordinate he trusts completely. The knights from Grossheim stand there with these dark, heavy looks on their faces as they think about how Farrington completely destroyed their home. And honestly, the group just hates everything about that kingdom so much they can barely handle the thought of it. Celia's heart is pounding out of her chest and she's sweating like crazy, but she tries to force herself to stay calm so she can figure out a way out of this mess. She looks Dietrich right in the face, calling him by his real name now, and asks him what the point of all this even is. Dietrich asks if he really has to spell it out for her, but she doesn't back down and tells him she definitely wants to know. He gets this little look on his face and says if that's the case, he'll tell her exactly what's going on, and he explains that they've been waiting for a chance to take their homeland back for a really long time now. He goes on about how he spent 10 years groveling and acting like a servant for those corrupt Farrington nobles. It's so gross to him he feels like he's gonna be sick. Dietrich's eyes get real cold as he says the wait is finally over, because they're marching straight for the capital of Farrington right now with one goal, to take King Elvis's head. Dietrich tells her he spent 10 whole years living like a nobody in Farrington just to make this happen, and Celia's mind goes straight back to when they were kids. She can't wrap her head around him faking it for a decade. She remembers him being so nice and genuine back then, making it almost impossible to believe this is the same guy. Looking at him now, she says she never would have thought he'd actually try to kill Lord Elvis just for some revenge, but Dietrich just gives her this look and admits he had a real reason for even talking to her in the first place. He leans in close and asks if she ever figured out why he got so close to her. She's just stuck on the word motive. That's when he drops the truth. His plan from the very start was actually to kill her too, since her family, the House of Lansbury, were the ones who backed the war that ruined his entire country. He gets right in her ear and tells her that her own cousin was the one who personally murdered his parents and siblings. He explains that a servant who made it out alive told him every single detail about how his whole family got wiped out. Dietrich looks her right in the eyes and says he swore to get revenge against the entire kingdom of Farrington. Celia starts shaking as she whispers about what happened to Dennis's family. She remembers her cousin actually bragging about his wins and how he wiped out every noble who stood in Farrington's way. And it hits her how he proudly talked about destroying a beautiful country, killing regular people, and even beheading a king who was just begging for mercy. Dietrich stands there with this dark look, saying he's never going to forgive any of them. Celia looks at him, totally stunned, and asks if that's the real reason he tried to kill her too. He admits that at first he only got close to her because he thought it was the best way to get back at the Duke's family, but then he realized it was kind of pointless since the Duke's family treated her like garbage anyway, so he gave up on that plan. Still, he says it drove him crazy seeing her always following Elvis around, and asks if she finally gets how terrible Farrington has become. He finishes by saying that Elvis is a complete disaster who doesn't have a single bit of political talent. Dietrich doesn't hold back, telling Celia that Elvis is nothing but a degenerate who kills helpless people and messes with dark magic. Celia's face goes pale as she starts to realize what he's saying, asking if Elvis actually used a curse or some kind of sorcery. Dietrich explains that sorcery is a disgusting, forbidden art that draws its power from an evil god who hates the spirits. Then he looks her right in the eyes and asks if she has any idea why Elvis let the youngest prince stay alive. He explains that Elvis used a cowardly trick to make sure Grossheim would never be able to stand up to Farrington again. And a glowing, magical mark appears as Dietrich reveals that the king literally branded the prince with it. Celia's heart drops while she puts the pieces together, whispering to herself about what a mark like that actually means. Dietrich leans back and laughs at the irony, saying the curse made it impossible for them to fight back while everyone called Elvis a wise king. He tells her that a man that full of himself could only ever function as a ruler, because she was there by his side, leaving Celia completely stunned as he points out that her position and brains were the only things actually keeping the kingdom together. Dennis keeps talking down to her, saying that even someone totally clueless could have played the part better than she did. He leans in with a smug look, telling Celia straight to her face that she was never anything more than an obstacle to him. Celia stands there frozen while he calls her a nuisance, mocking the way she always followed the rules of the St. Cantors so perfectly. He explains that her goodness was actually a problem. If she hadn't been so protected, he could have weakened the kingdom from the inside. So Dennis reveals the real plan was to find someone else and drag that little girl out into the light. Celia's voice shakes as the pieces start falling into place, and she asks if the girl he's talking about is Muriel. Dennis just smirks and confirms it, calling Muriel the perfect puppet because she's weak-minded, arrogant, and blinded by her own sense of justice. He reaches toward Celia, telling her that Muriel showed up at the perfect moment and he knew everything would work out if she was involved. It finally clicks for Celia that she was just a barrier to his goals. Her presence meant the kingdom was too secure for him to make a move, leaving her shattered as she realizes he purposely set her up to fail just so Muriel could take her spot at the top. Dennis brings up the match from 2 years ago. He tells her there was no way she should have lost to a kid like that, especially since she was clearly better, and it's plain as day she should have won. Celia looks down, wishing he would just stop talking before he reminds her that he was the one helping with the exam back then. Celia's head is spinning, and she just wants him to be quiet while she remembers how he acted like a friend, telling her he was there to help her out. But then his tone shifts, and he admits that rigging the whole thing behind her back was actually pretty easy. Celia can't handle it, thinking about how he told her he believed in her victory, only for him to ask her if she finally gets what was really happening. He gets right in her face while she's crying and says he's the one who made sure she lost. It turns out he and his group messed with everything because they couldn't have her winning, and he's even surprised it worked out so perfectly. Celia is totally crushed. She stands there in the dark, asking herself if their entire friendship was just a lie. Dennis keeps going, asking if she didn't think it was weird when he swapped her strings. He says he couldn't have made a fake that good on the fly, showing just how long he'd been planning this. Celia realizes that everything she thought was real was actually just a lie, and Dennis explains how he planned for her to lose her title as a saint singer all along. He even had those fake strings ready way before the exam just in case, making Celia clench her dress tight while tears drip onto her lap. She asks him if he's really been lying to her this entire time. Dennis doesn't even blink, just looks at her with a smirk and admits he's been playing her over and over again. It's a lot to take in, but Celia just stares at the ground and says she gets it now. She tells him she understands, so Dennis starts laughing, telling her he knew she'd catch on quick. But before he can finish his sentence, Celia snaps and slams her head right into his face. He lets out a grunt as she catches him completely off guard, then she starts screaming for Lord Dietrich. She's completely lost it, and she yells at Dennis, demanding to know what he thinks he's doing to him. She tells him he should feel lucky that a headbutt is the only thing she's doing to him right now, because the physical hit is nothing compared to the pain she's feeling. She's sobbing as she says this is how it's going to be from now on. Dennis looks completely stunned after the hit, hearing how much it hurts to be betrayed by someone you actually love, and Celia doesn't stop there. She screams at him, asking if he's really been lying to her this entire time. So she tells him to just go ahead and laugh at her for being such a fool and picking a fight she can't win. But she's sobbing now, yelling about how he even tricked everyone back in Greenhill while the guards tell her to stop struggling, and Dennis gets this serious look on his face, starting to say that the days he spent in Greenhill were actually, but then he stops himself, saying it's way too late for any of that now. He turns to his men and tells them to get ready to move because he's heading back to the manor for a bit. Then one of the guys asks what they should do with Celia, and Dennis just walks away, telling them to lock her up until everything is over. He adds that they should be polite since she's a lady, but Celia just cries out for him to wait, and Dennis just gives a little smirk, telling her this is goodbye for good. Dennis looks down with a soft expression, telling Celia to please just find a way to be happy. Celia begs him to wait, reaching out and grabbing his sleeve with everything she's got as she watches him walk away through the stone archway, crying out that she really believed in him. She remembers back when things were different, how he found her crying and told her to share everything with him, and how they used to walk through Green Hill together, Dennis asking her if she liked living in such a nice place. He'd smile and tell her he believed in her more than anyone else in the world, but now she's just collapsed on the floor, sobbing about how much she actually loved him. The scene shifts to the palace where a guard rushes in, yelling that there's a massive emergency. He reports to the king that the Grossheim army has finally attacked and smashed right through the border, so King Elvis just sits there looking bored, asking if those losers really think they can start a war. Muriel suggests sending the army out to flex the king's power, confidently claiming she can heal the soldiers as many times as it takes. Elvis agrees, saying victory will be easy with the power of the holy song. Muriel then orders the songstresses to be sent to the front lines, and the command is made official as a royal decree that no one can disobey. The girls are absolutely terrified, and Penelope screams out as the reality of the situation hits. She tries to argue that a battlefield is no place for them, and that the holy melody actually ruins people's mental strength. She mentions Celia said the same thing, but gets slapped right across the face before she can finish. She hits the ground hard as someone yells her name. A soldier stands over her, yelling that their job is just to heal and asking if they're planning to hold back like Celia did. He looks totally unhinged, saying he doesn't care about mental fortitude. The soldiers are acting completely unhinged. They're laughing and shouting about how their army is basically invincible since they can just get healed over and over. Back in the room, Celia slowly starts to wake up. She's still half asleep and groggily wonders if it's already morning. She's still trapped in her daily routine in her head, thinking she might have cooking duty. She tells herself she needs to go wash her face and get to the kitchen soon. Suddenly, someone's voice cuts through her sleepy thoughts. They mention it looks like she's finally awake, which catches her completely off guard. Celia loses it and bolts upright in bed. But it's just a kid sitting by the window who says he was bored since she slept so long for someone who just got captured. The kid gives her a friendly wave and introduces himself as Paul. He lets her know he's the one assigned to be her caretaker for now. Celia's eyes go wide as she recognizes the name. It's a Grossheim name, and the reality of her situation starts to sink in. She has a quick flashback of Dietrich getting way too close to her face. It hits her then that everything from last night definitely wasn't a dream. Celia immediately asks where Dennis is. Paul tells her that Lord Dietrich took off for the main camp earlier that morning. Paul sets down a tray of bread and fruit for her. He tells her to go ahead and eat, joking that he didn't put any poison in it. Looking at Celia, Paul thinks to himself that she's really just a kid, despite her being a holy musician from the kingdom they're fighting. She gives a little laugh and admits she was actually starting to get pretty hungry, taking the food he brought since she knows she needs her strength. Celia explains that she's been ordered to keep a close watch on him, but Paul leans in close and tells her that trying to win him over to help her escape won't work. Paul realizes she saw right through his tough guy act, and Celia just looks embarrassed, insisting she isn't the type of person to pull a move like that. He figures this kid is going to be a major handful to look after, but at the same time she doesn't seem like she'd actually do anything to hurt him. Paul suddenly stops and looks at her with a much more serious expression. He's got a question that's been bothering him since the night before. He looks her straight in the eyes and asks why Dennis doesn't just kill him. It's a dark question that hangs heavy in the room. Paul thinks back to everything that went down, realizing he was in too much shock to think clearly at the time, but now Dennis's actions feel totally off. There was no logical reason for Dennis to reveal his true name, what he was really after, or even admit that the whole situation was a trap. He knows he'd be a lot easier to control if he didn't know anything. Since he's heard top-secret info, he figures the fastest move would be to just end him. Paul keeps thinking about how things ended with Dennis, especially the way the guy looked right before he took off, and he can't stop wondering why there was so much pain in Dennis's eyes during those last few moments. Paul eventually shakes it off, scratching his head and saying it doesn't really matter as long as they're both still breathing. So he sits down across from Celia and offers to chat for a bit to pass the time while they get some food in them. Celia looks down at the meal, sounding pretty quiet as she tells him she'll take him up on that offer. She starts tearing into a piece of bread, mentioning that she was actually supposed to be the one handling cooking duty this morning. But since she's never stayed out without permission before, she's honestly a little worried that everyone back home is totally losing it. Paul just leans back and tells her not to sweat it because Lord Dietrich said he gave everyone a perfect explanation, which turns out to be a total lie, where Dietrich told everyone she was so head over heels that she couldn't stand to leave his side, even going as far as saying she was too embarrassed to tell the people at the manor herself, and asked him to break the news. Celia's completely lost, asking what that's even supposed to mean and wondering who could have even come up with a story like that. Paul just plays it cool, saying that's why it's totally fine for her to be gone for a month, while Celia thinks about how much she wants to yell at Dietrich, but then she remembers talking to Amy. She just sighs and wipes her head, pretty much knowing that Amy is definitely on board with this whole mess. Paul points out that help isn't coming from the manor, then asks if Dietrich is from a big family over in Grossheim. He gets all excited and mentions that Dietrich is from a top-tier family with royal ties, and that he's actually the same age as the youngest prince, Lord Conrad. Since they had the same hair and eye color, Paul explains they basically grew up like brothers, which makes Celia stop and think about that cursed Prince Dennis was talking about earlier. Paul's curious too, so he asks what kind of curse was actually put on the prince in the first place. Celia's caught off guard, realizing that even if she used her holy song, it still wouldn't be enough to break the curse. Paul looks down and mentions they even talked to the old chief Holy Cantor back then, but it didn't do any good. Celia leans in close, telling him they might still find some kind of clue if he just tells her what it's like. Paul says he can't really get into the specific details, but he starts to open up anyway. He tells her about a red birthmark on the prince's left chest, and Celia realizes it's a curse aimed right at his heart. Paul explains how these things work, saying the effect usually disappears the second the person who cast it dies. So the fastest way to break the whole thing is honestly just to kill Lord Elvis. But then he brings up a weird point. He's never once heard of an assassin being sent to take him out. Celia starts putting the pieces together, looking pretty worried as she wonders if the people in Grossheim are holding back because they've realized that killing Lord Elvis isn't even an option for them. Celia identifies the dark magic as a specific clause from a forbidden grimoire, and Paul looks like he's seen a ghost, completely shocked she knows about it. She explains that the spell is kept in a secret book for royalty, and it works by carving a mark that sinks the victim's heart with the person who cast it. It's a nightmare scenario where Prince Conrad's very life is tied to Lord Elvis, meaning if one of them takes a hit, the other one feels it too. Celia's expression goes cold as she realizes that the entire kingdom of Grossheim is being held hostage by this one curse, making it impossible for Prince Conrad to ever fight back against Lord Elvis. Paul looks stressed, asking if that's really how things stand, so Celia points out that breaking the curse would have been seen as treason against the kingdom. But there's actually more to it than just politics. She looks at Paul with a really soft, sad look and quietly calls out his name, and that's when Paul starts to lose it, asking why everything had to lead to someone needing to kill the king right this second. He shuts his eyes tight, terrified because he knows that if Lord Elvis dies, Prince Conrad is going to go right along with him. Paul just sits there with his head down, completely broken by the truth, while Celia watches him in silence. Dennis thinks back to how he and the prince were almost identical, since their hair and eye colors matched, and mentions the red birthmark on his left side. Paul looks like he's finally putting the pieces together, especially when Dennis looks down and admits he's still got a pretty nasty scar from that day. Celia watches him, her expression softening while the heavy realization sinks in. It turns out the one who was actually cursed this whole time was Dennis, and Celia addresses Dietrich as Lord Conrad. He just thanks her for being patient and putting up with his selfish request, but he smiles and tells her she's wrong to thank him, since she's basically the hero of their entire army. Moving on, he explains how her strategies kept casualties at a minimum for both the Grossheim army and the people of Farrington. Dietrich looks down, mentioning that their stop in the Vest region was also part of it, because he knew she wanted to see her one last time. He stands there with a look of total resolve, saying he's willing to trade his own life away if that's what it takes to finish this. The final truth is laid bare. The person Lord Elvis cursed 10 years ago wasn't Prince Conrad, it was Dennis. The mood turns dark as the narrator explains that Dennis is planning to take down Lord Elvis, even if he has to die with him. He sits there at the table in the guardhouse, looking completely dead serious and telling the other guys that he's certain about it, but the guy across from him isn't having it, asking what this meeting is even for and threatening to tie him up again if it's dumb. Celia steps in with a calm look, telling everyone in the room that this is a huge deal for all of them too, and then she drops the real bomb, asking what would happen if she told them her music could actually break the curse. The guy just laughs it off, saying if that were possible it would have happened ages ago, and tells her to stop lying since even the high-ranking priests failed. Celia doesn't blink, just looks him in the eye and tells him the reason she knows it'll work is because she used to be that exact person. The room goes quiet as the guy asks what she just said, so she repeats that they should know she used to hold the top spot in the church, and explains how only the leader is allowed to read the secret books in the castle stuff, way too hard for any normal musician to handle. With total confidence, she finishes by saying she can heal even a curse as nasty and powerful as the one they're dealing with. The whole room goes dead silent as Celia mentions there's a specific song that can break the curse on Dietrich. She explains that if the lead musician they talked to before was losing their touch, it makes sense they failed. With total confidence, she tells them she has the holy melody fully memorized and knows she can play it perfectly. Dietrich just looks down, barely whispering, "Really?" While he tries to process everything, Paul is visibly shaking as he looks at his leader, asking if they're even going to make it out of this alive. Celia cuts through the heavy mood by calling Paul's name, and he quickly answers her. She gives them a small smile and says they should just let her try, since they don't really have anything to lose. Fast forward a few days, and Celia is thinking back on the big scene she caused. She's just sitting against the wall in her room, bored out of her mind because she hasn't heard a single word back. Looking back at Dietrich's intense face, she realizes she was just so desperate to stop Dennis that she totally bluffed her way through that speech. The guy tells Celia he's going to check with his bosses and asks her to stay put for a bit. At least, he managed to get them to agree to a deal for now. Celia looks calm, but on the inside she's totally losing it. She's just glad all those card games she played with the guys gave her a solid poker face. It's finally time for the truth, so they decide to take it all the way back to the beginning, starting with what went down 10 years ago. Back then, when Dietrich found out the capital had been taken and the royals were being hunted, he actually put on Prince Conrad's clothes and walked right out in front of the Farrington army. Celia listens in shock as she hears how he risked everything just to act as a distraction, and it worked, because Elvis cursed him without ever realizing he was dealing with a body double. It turned into their best-kept secret. Rebuilding a country while being stepped on by a tyrant is a slow process, especially when everyone is tired of fighting. And if Dietrich had just died to kill Elvis right then, the enemy probably would have just attacked again anyway. So they spent the last 10 years playing the long game, buying time to rebuild and keeping the enemy's guard down until they were ready to strike back. Dietrich keeps explaining the plan, saying the final step is getting rid of him since he's a nuisance who plotted to weaken the nation. He admits that's basically how it goes, and it's clear Dietrich has been trading his own life this whole time to make it happen, so Celia finally says it out loud, confirming that his real goal is to strike down Elvis once and for all. Dietrich looks her in the eye and mentions how she doesn't seem shaken by any of this at all, even though Elvis used to be her lover. He asks if she's really okay with hearing that her entire homeland is going to be destroyed, but Celia just looks down, saying Farrington's fate isn't something she can change, no matter how hard she tries to fight it alone. She's finally realized that trying to save Elvis just isn't the right thing to do anymore, because she's finally free from everything that was holding her back. Now, her only real concern is making sure her old subordinates are safe. She thinks back to the manor and all the people who looked out for her when she was stuck in the past. And looking at him, she realizes that Dietrich was one of the people who saved her too. Celia looks back on everything, wondering what would have happened if she hadn't overheard that secret conversation. They were supposed to say their goodbyes the very next day, just leaving things as they were. She thinks about how she could have walked away with nothing but happy memories of him. But she realizes that if Dennis's plan worked, she'd be tucked away safely in Greenhill, totally clueless about the war. She sees Dietrich's face in her mind, hearing him tell her goodbye and wishing for her to be happy. It all starts to click for her. She finally sees the truth behind his actions, and the frustration just boils over, leading her to slam her fist onto the table with everything she's got. She yells out, asking what he even means by telling her to be happy when everything is a mess. Dietrich is completely stunned as she asks if he really thought acting cold would make her just forget him. She demands to know if he wanted her to think he was a jerk, just so she wouldn't care if he died, asking if he actually thought that was being kind. Celia finally lets it all out, yelling that there is a limit to how irresponsible he can be. She grips the table so hard her hands start shaking, telling him he lied to her and kept secrets until the very end. Tears start streaming down her face as she says she's going to die, asking how he could even do this to her. She turns to the guys and tells them she actually has the power to help, so she asks them to let her break the curse, ending her speech with a total demand to be taken straight to Dennis. Pretty soon, a carriage is flying down the road, kicking up dust as they move as fast as they can, and inside, Paul tells her that her request felt way more like a threat. But Celia just says he's being rude and it was perfectly humble. Paul asks if she actually brought the Sagen since the instrument she's holding is just a practice kodo. He looks out the window and wonders if the people back at the manor even realize they've returned yet, making Celia look totally flustered as she insists she didn't screw up and definitely brought everything important. Celia is losing her mind as the carriage bounces around, screaming at the top of her lungs while Paul warns her to be careful or she's going to end up biting her tongue. Deep in thought, Dietrich realizes the recent battles have exposed a major weakness. The Farrington army leaned way too hard on the holy melody, and they've totally lost their edge. He stands there with Conrad, noting that the enemy soldiers have become so soft they just tuck tail and run the moment they get a tiny scratch. And looking at the situation, he knows the kingdom is going to fall way easier than anyone expected. Dietrich admits that if Celia was still in command, this wouldn't be such a cakewalk. It's actually playing out exactly like the disaster she warned everyone about. His whole plan was to weaken the kingdom by making sure Celia stayed far away from the front lines, knowing she would have stayed and fought for her people until the very end. He can't stop thinking about her smile, feeling the weight of the fact that he completely lied to her and broke her heart. It was pure selfishness that made him want to see her one last time. He just couldn't let go, and now he's realizing that his obsession only made things worse for her, leaving him gripping his head in total regret. Just then, a soldier interrupts his thoughts to tell him and Conrad that it's time to move out. Dietrich's boot hits the gravel as he asks if they're ready to move out, finally ready to set the plan in motion. He looks off into the distance, thinking that if Celia ever hears about him dying one day, she probably wouldn't even be sad about losing someone she left on such bad terms. At the end of the day, his only real wish is just knowing that she's still alive somewhere. Moving on, he rallies the soldiers of Grossheim, telling them it's time to march and take down the evil king. He draws his sword and gives the order to advance, sending the whole army charging forward. The city turns into total chaos as the Grossheim army breaks into the main square. People are freaking out because the castle gates are locked and they're trapped. One guy yells out in a panic, wondering why the Farrington army isn't doing anything to stop this and protect the city. Despite the rush, the Grossheim troops are moving carefully. They have strict orders to make sure they don't hurt any civilians during the push, and everyone is staying focused on the main goal. They're only there to take King Elvis's head. One of the knights calls out to Dietrich, letting him know they can reach the royal castle through the East Boulevard. Dietrich agrees, telling everyone to head east just like he planned, but right as they move, a massive wall of fire explodes out of nowhere. He winces from the blast, shielding his eyes while trying to figure out where all this fire is even coming from. His men start panicking, pointing out that there isn't even a smell of oil in the air despite the heat being totally insane. Dietrich notices something is way off. There isn't any smoke coming from the flames, making the whole thing look even weirder. He stares at the creepy red glow, realizing this is definitely sorcery and they don't have any way to put out flames from an evil god. A woman's scream for help cuts through the noise, catching Dietrich's attention as he looks toward the burning building. He sees the regular people trapped in the chaos, realizing the civilians are getting caught up in the middle of everything. Dietrich grips his reins hard, wondering if Elvis is behind this, and if the guy even cares about what happens to his own people. Before he can do anything, a soldier yells that the Farrington army is closing in from behind, leaving them trapped between the fire and the enemy. Dietrich admits he really wanted to stay out of a direct fight, but since they're backed into a corner, he tells his men to get ready to hit the Farrington army. But then he stops cold, hearing a sound he knows all too well. It's a holy anthem. As the knights charge forward, Dietrich realizes that if those musicians start backing up the Farrington soldiers here, his side won't have any chance at winning. The whole situation is just turning into a total mess. Back with the musicians, one of them shouts that they're done with the melody and tells everyone they need to jump straight into the next one. But another girl looks like she's about to collapse, begging them to just wait for a second. She's shaking and holding her instrument, explaining that she was just sent back from the front and hasn't even slept yet. She tells them she's already at her absolute limit, but the others know they can't stop now. One of the other musicians says they don't have a choice because defying orders would be even worse for them. Then she looks up and freaks out, calling for Annabelle and realizing those aren't normal fires, they're actually cursed flames. Everyone starts losing it as the city goes up in flames, running for their lives and screaming while Celia panics, gripping her instrument and yelling that they have to do something to save the residents. But one of the musicians points out King Elvis probably ordered the fires, meaning putting them out would be treason, which leaves them frozen. Celia is in shock while someone else screams out for the children trapped inside. People nearby are caught in the heat, yelling about how much it burns while they try to fight the flames. The musicians can barely watch, crying and saying the whole situation is just way too cruel to handle, and Celia bites her lip hard, knowing they're the only ones with the power to actually stop this. A voice from the chaos begs for someone, anyone, to come and help, pleading for a hand while Celia just stands there, looking completely shattered by the cries for help. The girls break down, talking about how they were treated like garbage at the castle and forced to play. Celia thinks about how they used to waste their magic on tiny things like scratches or stomach aches, but now she yells out that holy song was actually made to save people, and this is why it really exists. The musicians all join in, calling out to the spirits to hear them, begging for strength as massive bubbles of light start covering the burning buildings across the city. Down on the ground, a girl realizes the burning pain is finally starting to go away. while the rest of the townspeople stop in their tracks, staring at the flames in total disbelief. The fire just starts to vanish into the light, and someone screams out that it's actually fading, which has people cheering that they're saved, while the musicians stand their ground despite the exhaustion. Celia looks on with a tired smile, but then someone notices her and asks if she's the one who put the fire out. The mood shifts fast when a guy yells, asking why she's here when she's supposed to be with the army. The situation turns into total chaos as Celia tells everyone to run, but then a voice asks if the guy in front of them is her former subordinate, making Celia freeze up. She looks at the man in the heavy armor, hardly believing her eyes as she asks if it's really Dennis standing there. Moving back to the journey, the carriages are rattling down the road toward the city. Dennis calls out that they're almost at the capital and asks if she's ready. Celia looks pretty upbeat as she confirms she's done changing into her gear, leading Dennis to call her the fallen saint singer who came back for her home. She looks down at her clothes, thinking about how she just couldn't bring herself to toss these old vestments, never thinking she'd actually put them back on. Paul watches her, sounding a bit worried as he asks if she can really break the curse, especially since that whole saint singer thing is supposed to be incredibly hard. Celia gets a really serious look on her face, and then she tells him straight up that she's going to break it no matter what happens. She knows that even after being away for 2 years, her skills haven't slipped at all, mostly because she's been practicing like crazy every single day of the trip. With her mind totally set, she looks out at the horizon, finally spotting the royal capital in the distance as they get closer. The carriage starts picking up speed while Dennis warns her he's heading straight for the camp, so she better hold on tight and not fall out. Celia looks out at her old home with a look of pure focus, thinking to herself that she's finally back in Farrington. The massive spires of the royal castle stand tall against the sky, and she sends out a silent warning for Dennis to just wait and see. But the cool moment fades fast when they stop. Celia is totally wiped out and complaining about her sore butt, while Dennis just tells her they're switching to warhorses. Suddenly, someone's eyes go wide as they spot her. A voice calls out her name in total shock from across the camp. Celia turns around and sees her old friend Annabelle standing there looking like she's seen a ghost and about to burst into tears. They start talking about the mess the kingdom is in, specifically mentioning those crazy flames of sorcery that have been wrecking everything. The other musicians gather around the fire, and one of them admits she thought she was a goner, fully expecting the army to execute her for being a rebel. But then she looks at Celia and tells her the truth, that Dennis was the one who actually stepped in and protected them from the soldiers. Celia goes quiet, just taking it all in, repeating his name as she realizes how much he's been doing behind the scenes. She looks at the group of girls with a soft expression, just telling them she's honestly glad they all made it through safe. Celia's face goes totally blank as she asks what happened to the rest of the holy orchestra, but the look on her friends' faces says everything. One of the girls starts to explain that everything went down specifically because of Lady Muriel's orders, and then she holds out a bunch of metal tags on chains. Celia stares at them, asking if that's actually a musician's identification. The girl grips the metal plates tight and quietly tells her that these tags are all that's left. They belong to her comrades who were forced into the army, and Celia just stands there looking completely crushed while holding them. Names like Nerope and Sonia are etched into the metal, and she's told that Penelope didn't even die in a real fight. Instead, it turns out she was just abandoned by the Farrington army and left to die. Celia's eyes go wide as she tries to process the horror. The guilt hits her hard and she starts saying it's all her fault, thinking if she'd just stayed at the castle, maybe they'd still be alive. Tears start streaming down her face, but Annabelle stops her right there, telling her she can't blame herself for any of this. She explains that Penelope and the others fought back against the army's orders, because Celia was the one who warned them about how dangerous using holy music could really be. Annabelle looks right at her and says the only reason they were brave enough to save people against the government's orders was because of everything Celia taught them. She grips the metal tags tight, saying those lessons stayed with them, and a country that throws its people away was always going to fail, even after she was forced out of the kingdom. Annabelle gives a small, sad smile while reminding her that her influence never actually faded. Celia can't help but cry as she whispers Annabelle's name, but then someone from the camp yells out that everything is finally ready, so Celia wipes her eyes and tries to pull it together. Annabelle looks at her one last time and tells her to go do what she has to do. But before she leaves, Celia holds out the identification tags and says she's entrusting them to Annabelle, basically handing over the future of the whole holy choir to her. Annabelle looks up at her, realizing just how much Celia trusts her with, but then Annabelle stops her. She says there was one last thing Penelope always wanted to tell her, which makes Celia stop in her tracks. Annabelle smiles through the tears and says Penelope wanted her to know she finally learned how to mend her own socks. Moving on, the scene shifts over to the soldiers where someone calls out for Lord Conrad. A soldier reports that the former first holy cantor just left for the castle, and Dietrich just listens, taking it all in, while someone prays that she reaches him safely and that he stays protected. The prayer goes on, asking to save their friend as Celia grips her necklace, looking completely locked in as she tells everyone to leave the guiding to her. One of the soldiers asks where Dietrich went, and another guy says he just left for the audience chamber to see King Elvis. As they move, a soldier tells Celia he's holding onto her holy strings for now. But then, he stops to ask if she actually came all this way just to save King Elvis. Celia just says the king's name to herself for a second before telling him she's fully prepared for Elvis to be killed, since that's just the way things have to go. They keep moving, but one of the soldiers mentions how weird it is that there aren't any guards or even signs of a struggle. One of the soldiers mentions he heard no high-ranking officers were seen during the street fights and figures they'd be at the castle, but instead, it looks like they just abandoned the king and ran for it. Celia stares at the empty, quiet halls and realizes this is really how the nation ends. She thinks to herself that even if Elvis survives, there's no way the country can recover, when suddenly, the air snaps and the soldiers are caught off guard by a sudden magical impact. Celia stops in her tracks as she realizes they've just run straight into a sorcery barrier. The soldier on the other side yells that they've been cut off, and Celia realizes she can't even break the wall since her holy strings are gone. A voice suddenly booms through the hall, telling them they fell right into a trap, and that the speaker knew Celia would eventually show up if they just stayed put. The voice teases her, mocking the fact that the former holy performer who already lost to them is back for more. Celia glares forward as a voice tells her she finally realized what she's supposed to do, calling out her name and saying they'll allow her to serve under them, which leaves her completely stunned. Celia snaps and screams for everyone to hurry up and finish off the enemies so they can save the king. She thinks back to how she was always loved even as a kid, getting head pats and feeling special. Even after coming to the castle, she tells herself she worked her hardest for everyone's sake. Because of that, she rose to the top fast and became the king's favorite. And it didn't stop there since the king used to drive away anyone who was ever mean to her, making sure she was always protected. She remembers a time when every soldier adored her and swore to give their lives in her service. But now she's standing in an empty courtyard, clutching her head and wondering why there's no one left. She grips her hair in total panic, refusing to believe that everyone she relied on has actually disappeared. Celia's eyes go wide and bloodshot as she stares ahead, claiming that the king belongs to her, and she grips the stone railing of the balcony with all her strength, whispering to herself that she has to save him. She looks completely filled with rage while thinking about a secret promise the two of them made, so she yells out that she's willing to use even a fallen saint singer like Muriel to get what she wants. Muriel stands there with the soldiers as Celia calls her name, asking if she's the one who put up this magic barrier. Celia mocks her for using dark arts instead of spirit power, but Muriel just looks back and asks why it matters. Celia starts walking forward, telling Muriel she worked hard to separate her from the Grossheim group, and she stands right in front of Muriel, telling her she's going to make sure she becomes useful to the king. Muriel thinks to herself about how she was going to pretend to be a captured singer to trick people, but it's a waste of time with Celia as the enemy, especially since Muriel already chose to fight with her new friends. Celia glares with cold, narrowed eyes, ordering Muriel to hand over the holy strings or just drop the barrier already. Muriel grits her teeth and looks down, telling Celia that after all this time, she really hasn't changed a bit. Muriel is suddenly shaking with rage, screaming that she's so angry she can't even stand it anymore, while she thinks back to how the leaders never listened to her venting about how everyone only cared about Lady Celia. In the memory, she insists she was the one who should have been in charge, claiming she's the talented one who was right. She remembers the knights and officials promising to love and protect her, but things didn't stay that way for long. Muriel loses it and screams, demanding to know why everyone abandoned her and ran away when she needed them. She calms down a bit to point out that the country is ruined and so many singers have been sacrificed already. So she looks Celia right in the eyes, asking if she actually still believes she's doing the right thing after all this. Celia just snaps back that it's obvious, since she and the king are nobles, commoners are supposed to just obey. Celia's eyes go cold as she repeats those harsh words, saying she has no use for people who can't follow orders or just give up and die. Muriel screams that Penelope and the others are dead because the army abandoned them, making Celia clench her fist in a tight grip. Celia just asks what of it, coldly suggesting that anyone drafted into a war should be ready to lose their life. She steps closer and tells Muriel they should be happy to die for their duty, causing Muriel to shake with a violent, silent rage. Celia finally snaps and tells Muriel to clench her teeth, winding up for something big. Before Muriel can even react, Celia levels her with a massive punch to the face, sending her flying back across the room. Standing over her with blood on her knuckles, Celia says the pain of that punch is nothing compared to what Penelope and the others suffered. Muriel stammers from the ground about Celia's fancy clothes getting ruined, and Celia just calmly agrees like it's no big deal. Celia admits things might have been different if she hadn't fallen for the king's trap, revealing he actually rigged the exam results back then. Muriel can't believe the news, but she's still full of hate spitting blood as she glares up at the woman who just floored her. In the middle of the chaos, a voice shouts that the target is starting to fade away, prompting a plan to strike from above. Celia pushes a knight forward, telling him to move now and promising she'll be right behind him as soon as the wall is gone. With a desperate look, Celia begs the others to save Lord Dietrich, and they tell her to leave it to them. They swear to save him no matter what happens, standing their ground as things get intense. The scene shifts to a massive, empty hall where a voice simply notes that they've finally arrived. Dietrich stands there with a calm, almost scary look, mentioning the ruins of Grossheim like he's got a plan. Dennis yells out that his enemy is going to be destroyed right here in these ruins. The name of King Elvis of Farrington is brought up, hanging heavy over the whole room. Dennis is focused on the fight, but then Celia comes running in from the distance, shouting his name. He stops cold, his eyes widening in total shock as he realizes Celia is actually there. Dennis tries to ask how things are going, but Dietrich cuts him off immediately. He asks if Dennis is just some guy who knew his former self, Prince Conrad, then leans in close, staring him down while asking if Dennis still seriously thinks he's that same Lord Conrad. Dietrich admits that might be the case, pointing out that someone like Dennis has probably never even seen real knights practicing before. He thinks back for a second and mentions remembering a little pest that used to buzz around his Celia, which makes Dennis snap, yelling that Celia is her own person and doesn't belong to anyone at all. Dietrich just gives him a look and asks if that's really how it is. With a smug smile, he asks if this means Celia has finally decided to come back to him. Celia finally steps in with a stone-cold look, telling him to stop playing around right now. Dietrich says her name, but she doesn't back down, starting to explain that the person she's here to save is actually someone else entirely, and it's definitely not someone like him. Celia turns to Dennis to try and explain herself, while Dietrich just covers his face and says her words actually hurt his feelings. Dietrich stares her down, mocking how she used to be such a refined girl, but now she's fallen so low that she's actually trying to seduce a guy from Grossheim. Dennis snaps and lunges at him, but Dietrich just keeps that smug grin while their swords clash. Celia watches in total shock, screaming for Dennis to stop before things get out of hand. Knowing she has to move fast, she fumbles with her instrument and tells herself to hurry. She calls on the spirits to help her out, but suddenly she feels something go wrong. A string snaps on her lyre and she's hit with the realization that this is happening again, so she closes her eyes and takes a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm and not panic. The fight is getting intense, and she knows she has to break the curse before one of them falls, because right now, Dennis's life is totally on the line as she reaches out to help. Celia gasps and reaches out as her instrument breaks. The pieces rolling away across the cold stone floor. Dietrich shouts that he's got it, his face sprayed with blood, while Celia's eyes go wide with fear. She tries to call out for Dennis, but her voice fails as he just makes a faint, weak sound and fades out. Dietrich just stands there, covered in gore, and tells her he's sorry she had to see something so nasty. While Celia sits on the floor in shock, Dietrich looks at his bloody boots and asks Sagen if he brought the item. Celia suddenly lunges forward, and a dazed, bloody Dennis can only manage to say her name. She grabs Dietrich by his shirt. Desperate to see what's really going on with him, he asks if she really wants to be sure about this, and a light starts to glow in the darkness. Dietrich pulls his collar back to show her a massive black curse mark on his chest, leaving Celia completely terrified. He says he meant to kill Dennis in one shot but missed, and now he's just waiting to die right next to him. Dietrich tells Celia to hurry up and play the Dispel song, but then he just grabs her hand, tells her it's fine while she reaches for her broken harp. He looks her in the eyes and says this is the way things are supposed to be because he's done way too many bad things to keep going. Celia tries to argue that it's not true, but Dietrich just keeps going, says it's his fault her friends were cornered and killed. He calls himself a lowlife traitor and the worst criminal alive for messing with her feelings, saying he deserves a miserable death, and with a sad look on his face, he admits he's been planning for this exact moment for the last 10 years. Suddenly Dennis starts coughing up blood and tries to say something, which makes Celia completely lose it and scream his name. Blood sprays everywhere as Celia watches in total shock, reaching out and yelling for him as he starts to slip away. She catches him and begs him to stay with her, just holding on to him and crying out his name. Dennis looks up at her with barely any life left in his eyes, and weakly calls out to her one last time, telling her he just wanted her to know that the time they spent together made him the happiest guy in the world. Dennis looks back on their time together, saying that month in Greenhill, it was just such a warm and happy time for him. Celia's face is covered in blood and tears as she listens, begging him to stop talking like he's saying goodbye. Everything starts fading to black for him, but he manages to say he just really wanted to see her one last time. He's barely holding on while telling her how much he wanted to see her smile and hear her voice again. Celia is losing it, shouting at him to stop because she can't handle him acting like this is the end. Dennis just looks at her and says he's so sorry for hurting her as much as he did, and then she tells him that's enough while crying her eyes out, but he's still trying to get his last words out. He's got a weak smile on his face, thinking about how lucky he is to be looking at her at the very end. He calls out her name one more time and finally confesses that he's always only ever loved her. His armored hand goes limp and hits the ground with a thud, leaving Celia thinking about how cruel this all is. Celia is falling apart, yelling that it's just not fair for him to say all those things and then leave her. She just keeps crying out his name as she holds him. She goes quiet for a second, looking down and saying that she finally understands everything now, thinking back to how even if he did it for his own goals, he was the only friend she had when she was a lonely kid. He really did support her until the day she left the kingdom. She remembers the drinks and the laughs they had, thinking about how he filled her heart and shared all those warm times back in Greenhill. It finally clicks for her, and she admits to herself that she finally realizes just how much she loved him. Leaning in close to his face, she tells him that she loves him, the words hanging there while he lies still. She tries to keep it together, telling herself she's okay because she can still feel a pulse. It's weak, but it's there. Celia looks down at his body with a new look in her eyes and tells him she's not going to let him die. She wipes the tears away and promises herself she won't panic anymore, and that she'll use everything she has to fix this. Looking completely focused now, she says she's going to save him no matter what it takes. Celia calls out to the spirits, begging them to give her whatever power they can. A voice tells Dennis that if he really thinks he's a sinner, then he needs to stay alive and make things right. Celia starts playing with everything she has, and just then the world fades away. She looks down, sitting alone in a bright void. She looks around the white space, wondering where she ended up, when a voice calls her the daughter of the Holy Maestro and asks if she's actually ready to play that special melody. Celia looks down at her harp and says she is, as long as it breaks the curse on Dennis. The voice asks if she's really okay with saving him even if it means losing the things she cares about most. She doesn't hesitate and says yes with her whole heart. The voice starts to explain that this holy melody is different, showing her that it takes more than just skill. It needs real affection and a huge sacrifice to work. The voice explains that having a deep desire to pay any price for someone you love is the key. It's what pulls out the power of the holy song and makes the spirit's miracle happen. But there's always a catch, because once the song is over, a price has to be paid. Celia doesn't care though, only focusing on the hope that Dennis will survive as she plays. Standing alone in the center of that huge, glowing hall while the light takes over everything around her, Celia closes her eyes, looking totally wiped out. She tells herself that she's finally done everything she possibly could, and she realizes that the weird vision was just the spirits testing her. It was their last-ditch effort to try and get her to back down. Celia thanks the spirits for giving her their strength. She's bloodied and exhausted, but she just smiles down at Dennis, thinking about how she actually managed to save the person she loves most in the world, and in this exact moment she realizes that she's finally happy. She just tells herself she's truly happy as her hand drops to the ground and the music stops. But then she groans as the reality of what she did sets in. Her entire body starts to throb with crazy pain, making it hard to even think. Celia lies there with her eyes shut, looking completely spent as a voice calls out her name. It's Dennis, and he's losing it. He grabs her and keeps shouting her name, trying to get any kind of reaction out of her. Suddenly, Dennis realizes something. He feels warm. He checks himself over and sees all his injuries are just gone. He's alive, and as he holds Celia, the truth finally hits him. He looks down at her with tears in his eyes and asks if she's the one who really broke his curse. He starts shaking her gently, practically begging her to just open her eyes and wake up, but then he hears something. He freezes and looks around, trying to figure out where that weird noise is coming from. The sound is like a holy song, but it's totally twisted and sounds awful. A voice comes through the melody, saying they're here to save the king. The voice brags about using sorcery to take out all the enemies. Dennis stares toward the sound, asking who's even there, and that's when Muriel shows up. She looks completely unhinged, covered in blood with a creepy smile, telling him everything is fine and bringing up some promise they made. Dennis looks at her like she's lost her mind, asking what the hell she's talking about, but she just keeps staring, insisting that this was the deal they made. Muriel starts talking about the deal they made if things ever went sideways, and a bloody hand reaches out. Dietrich is just lying there in shock, finally putting the pieces together that it was actually Lord Elvis who was cursed. The guy can't even believe what he's seeing right now. Everything he thought he knew about the curse was wrong, and Muriel is standing there looking like a total mess. crying and smiling while she tells the king he's safe because of the song. Lord Elvis just looks back at her with this cold, blood-stained face and tells her she has his thanks. It's super creepy, and then she reaches her bloody hand out toward him, reminding him about that promise he made her, and she practically whispers it, asking him to finally make her his queen. Dietrich is watching the whole thing and he's just completely stunned. He can't find the words for how messed up this is, but then Lord Elvis doesn't even blink. He just says once she played that forbidden song, she became totally useless to him, leaving Muriel collapsed on the ground while he mocks her, asking if dying for the one she loves isn't the ultimate kind of happiness. Celia can't even wrap her head around what's happening. While Dietrich stands there with his blood-stained sword, he asks if this sick plan was what Elvis intended for Celia all along, and the realization hits him that even if they take the king down, he just used that holy music to bring himself back. He asks if Elvis really just used the head cantor as a lover for that one reason. Lord Elvis just smiles through the blood on his face, calling Dietrich a total nobody who shouldn't be talking down to him. He reminds Dietrich that he's only alive right now because he sacrificed Celia first, and Dietrich snaps, telling him not to even try lumping them together. Elvis doesn't care though, he just says it's the same for both of them, and he claims they're two of a kind for using Celia's feelings and throwing her life away. He says the whole thing was actually pretty easy, because Celia was just desperate for someone to love her and craved being needed by anyone. He mocks how fast she fell for a little emotional manipulation. Dietrich can barely contain his rage as he holds onto Muriel. Elvis just keeps going, saying he usually has no use for losers who can't win a duel. But if Dietrich actually has the power to break the curse, then Elvis admits he should have just kept Celia locked away for himself. Dietrich screams the king's name while reaching for his sword on the floor, but Elvis just looks down at him, totally unimpressed. He asks if Dietrich really plans on fighting when he's already such a tattered mess. Elvis rubs it in, saying that unlike Dietrich who was only decursed, he has been fully resurrected. He mockingly asks if Dietrich forgot he already lost this fight once before, and the knights come charging into the room, yelling out for Lord Dietrich to see if he's still alive. Dietrich can barely hold himself up, but he lets out a pained grunt as the effects of the music finally wear off. His body was completely frozen by that weird holy melody until just a second ago, leaving him staring at his blood-stained sword while he mutters the king's name under his breath. Elvis isn't worried at all. He tells Dietrich he has no shot at winning and should just stay face down on the floor like the loser he is. But Dietrich's eyes stay locked on him. He tells the king that he's going to get back up and strike him down once and for all. Things move fast after that. The Grossheim army finishes the siege, and since the king and his lead musician both fell in battle, Farrington officially surrenders. Later on, a letter explains that someone else had to take over governing the old Farrington lands because Dietrich turned down every request to lead them himself. The speaker tells him he's got his own responsibilities as the king of Grossheim now, so he definitely won't have time to just relax. In the end, all the nasty rumors about Celia Lansbury are gone. Now, traveling bards just go around singing beautiful, legendary songs about the two heroes who vanished. A pen scratches across paper as Dietrich thinks about how quickly people change their minds about someone, and as he writes, he looks down with a calm smile. He finishes the note by asking the person to send him another letter once things finally calm down. The letter is addressed to his dear friend Dietrich, wishing for peace for both him and Celia while the sun shines over a quiet estate, but inside Dietrich is sitting by a window talking to Celia. He tells her about his day, mentioning how he took the kids out for a walk earlier. He keeps the conversation going, saying everyone got a bit too excited and one of the boys, Eddie, took a spill. He promises her he handled the scrape just fine, and then he smiles, saying the sunlight felt amazing today. He asks her if she wants to head outside for a bit tomorrow if the weather stays nice, but his smile starts to fade as he trails off. He just looks at her for a second before softly saying her name again. He reaches out and holds her hand while she lies there completely still. He's just left wondering when she's finally going to wake up, and Muriel is standing right there, looking like she's about to cry. She tells him she's so sorry for being completely useless in this situation. Dietrich stands in the middle of the room, looking lost. He asks if Celia is really just never going to wake up at this rate. Muriel sits by the bed, admitting she has no idea what kind of price Celia paid to use that forbidden melody. She knows one thing for sure though, it completely drains every bit of physical strength, and Dietrich just stands there looking miserable. He blames himself, saying this whole thing only happened because of the curse he carries. But Muriel tries to keep things positive, pointing out that Celia's health actually looks okay. She tells him they just have to believe she's going to wake up sooner or later. And ever since that final showdown with Elvis, Celia has just been drifting in a deep, silent sleep while the world goes on without her. The doctors are completely stumped. Even though she isn't breathing and doesn't have a heartbeat, her body stays warm to the touch. Dietrich has brought in every specialist he could find, but they all walk away shaking their heads because none of it makes any sense. Even the small things are weird, like how her hair and nails haven't grown an inch, yet her skin still looks as healthy and bright as ever. Muriel tries to lighten the mood while tucking her in, teasing that Celia can be as much of a handful as she wants once she's awake. She tells her she'll have to pay her back for all this work, joking that she's going to charge her triple the interest for the wait. Dietrich just watches them, not really knowing what to say to her energy, so Muriel just laughs and says the debt is only getting bigger. It really is like time has just stopped for Celia while everything else keeps moving.